Did you know that more than 90% of viewers don't subscribe to our channel? If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. We don't run ads on our videos, so we don't earn anything from them. Every subscription, every like, every comment truly means the world to us. Your support keeps our passion alive and motivates us to create more. We'd also love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's start our story.
Story number 1. The night had settled over the interstate like a heavy wool blanket, mooting the shapes of the world until everything beyond the windshield was only suggestion and shadow. Miles of asphalt unrolled beneath the tires, a steady droning hum, and the only real light came from the truck's own beams, carving out a pale, trembling tunnel through the darkness ahead. Elias drove with both hands on the wheel, fingers resting lightly on the worn leather, the way you might rest your hands on the shoulders of an old friend. He had been driving long haul for 20 years, and nights like this were as familiar to him as his own reflection. The dashboard glowed with soft amber indicators, fuel gauge, engine temperature, the faint green bars of the radio signal sliding up and down like a heartbeat. Outside, the world smelled of cold air and distant rain. Condensation fogged the bottom corners of the side windows, and the vents pulsed a gentle flow of lukewarm air that carried the faint aroma of coffee and engine grease. A ceramic mug rattled quietly in its holder every time the truck glided over some unseen seam in the pavement. It was after midnight when the mist began. At first, it was just a thinning of the stars, a softening along the horizon. The clear, sharp night air blurred, as if someone had dragged a fingertip across a wet painting. The bright pinpoints of distant farmhouses smudged and faded. Then the fog rose up from the ditches in low, curling tendrils, pale and sluggish, catching the headlight beams and swelling white like breath on a cold mirror. Elias noticed the way the high beams bounced back at him, filling the windshield with a gentle, glowing haze. He flicked them back down to low and leaned forward a little, his right hand adjusting the wipers even though there was no rain. The rubber blades swept twice across the glass, leaving faint arcs of clarity that fog filled in again almost immediately. The weather report hadn't mentioned fog along this stretch. But then, the weather report rarely accounted for these empty, forgotten highways in the dead of night. The GPS unit on the dash showed a thin purple line cutting through a great dark space. The next town, a small, distant point with an estimated arrival time that felt more like a suggestion than a promise. He had taken a detour hours ago when an accident had closed the main interstate. The dispatcher's voice had crackled through the speaker, suggesting the old state route that cut through the hills, Hollow Ridge Pass. Fewer cars, more curves, a longer climb and a slower descent, but still faster than waiting for the wreck to clear. Hollow Ridge had a reputation among the older drivers. Not a bad one exactly. No gruesome stories, no campfire legends told in truck stop diners, but a quiet kind of wariness. Fog, they said. That pass always had fog. The sort that turned headlights into lanterns in a snow globe and swallowed landmarks whole. The mileage marker on the right-hand shoulder appeared suddenly out of nowhere, slick with moisture and half obscured by the whiteness that gathered in the air. Elias saw the number, 43, flash by, then vanish back into the murk. He adjusted his speed down a little. The weight of the trailer pressed gently behind him, a low, steady push at his back, like the hand of something enormous and patient. He could feel the subtle, rhythmic sway of it through the seat, through the steering column, the way a sailor might feel the water beneath a boat. The fog thickened until it became almost a substance, a soft, luminous cotton filling the air. The truck's beams didn't cut through it so much as illuminate it from within, turning the road ahead into a narrow, pale ribbon that vanished 10 truck lengths in front of him. Guardrails appeared at the edges of the light, slick silver lines that disappeared as quickly as they emerged. There was a strange comfort to it in a way. The world had shrunk to the cab, the dashboard glow, the steady thrum of the engine, the faint hiss of tires on damp pavement. Everything else, the The dark hills, the empty fields, the unseen houses far off the road had retreated behind the curtain of fog. It was just him and the machine and this narrow path through nowhere. His eyelids felt dry, a little heavy, and he blinked them slowly, letting the world blur and sharpen again. On the passenger seat, a thermos of coffee rocked gently with the motion of the truck, the metal catching and reflecting stray glints from the dash. Static crackled softly from the CB radio, an aimless whisper that rose and fell with no discernible pattern. Every so often, a distant voice would flicker through, too faint to understand, just a murmur, like someone talking in a room on the other side of a wall. Elias reached toward the unit, adjusting the dial, but the voices dissolved faster than he could catch them, slipping away into the white noise. The channel settled back into its soft, uneven hiss, and he left it there, a companionable background sound. The mileage marker 44 emerged from the fog, brief and concrete, then vanished again. He glanced at the digital clock, 12:27 a.m. The climb into Hollow Ridge Pass was subtle at first, the engine's hum deepening slightly, the weight of the trailer tugging a little more firmly. The fog seemed denser here, hugging the asphalt, clinging to the scrubby trees that lined the road. Their shapes were reduced to ghostly silhouettes, bare branches and black trunks quickly swallowed. The road curved, right then left, then right again, the patterns of its motion familiar in that way that comes from years of training and repetition. His body anticipated the turns before his eyes registered them, hands easing the wheel, foot ready on the brake, always leaving himself that margin of safety the rookies never quite understood. He passed mileage marker 45. A little while later, 46. The fog pressed in, tightening his world even more. He could no longer see the tops of his own mirrors. They were just twin gray smudges hovering at the edge of his vision. The reflective stripping along the trailer's sides gleamed faintly when the headlights caught them at an angle, ghost lights sliding along the length of the rig like slow lightning. Something about the air changed then, subtle but noticeable. The mist seemed to grow heavier, the moisture beading on the outside of the glass in tiny droplets that wove together into silvery veins. The sound inside the cab dulled slightly, as if the world outside had been wrapped in insulation. He glanced to the right and caught a glimpse of the slope of the hill, just for a second, a suggestion of grass and rock and low stunted trees, their forms blurred and half dissolved in the shining white. The radio crackled more sharply, an abrupt pop in the static, followed by a stretch of quiet so complete it pressed into the cabin like a held breath. Then very faintly, a voice. "Anyone Hollow Ridge, you copy." It was so soft he almost thought he had imagined it, a phantom syllable glitching through the noise. He listened, leaning a little closer to the unit. The green light flickered as if considering its next move. "Southbound on Ridge, can't see, that way station." The words were clipped, pieces missing like a film reel with frames cut out. The voice itself had a certain quality to it, a tone he couldn't place. Not old, not young, just tired maybe, uncertain. Elias cleared his throat, his own voice a little rough with disuse. "Breaker," he said calmly, his gaze steady on the milky road ahead. "This is northbound through Hollow Ridge. Way station's still a few miles up, far as I know. What's your 20? The response came in fragments, like something trying to break through water. "Been passing, 44, 45, 46, keeps over." The hairs on his forearms prickled. He flicked his gaze back to the edge of the road just as the mileage marker 46 slid past, white numbers glistening with condensation. He had just passed that one, hadn't he? He ran through the last few minutes in his mind, the gentle curve, the soft hum of the tires, the radio crackle. Marker 45, then 46. He was certain. He eased his foot slightly off the accelerator, letting the truck bleed a little speed. The trailer's weight nudged him from behind, then settled. The clock on the dash read 12:27 a.m. That couldn't be right. He was sure he had checked it after marker 44. Time should have moved. Even on the emptiest stretches of night road, time always inched forward. The radio crackled again, more insistent now, the distortion fuzzing the edges of the words. A station sign keeps same bend. He listened, throat dry. The voice sounded closer now, though he knew that meant nothing with CB signals. Copy, he said carefully. You say you're running past the same markers, 44 to 46. A long pause answered him, filled by the soft roaring of the truck's movement and the muffled hush of the fog pressing against the cab. Then, very quietly, as if the speaker had leaned into the mic to whisper directly to him. I've been on this stretch for over an hour. Elias swallowed, his tongue feeling thick. Out the window, the world did not change. The road unrolled, narrow and pale. The fog gathered in thick banks at the shoulders, occasional ragged clumps torn away by a breath of invisible wind. His headlights glowed weakly against it, never reaching very far. The next marker appeared, 46 again. Its white face gleamed back at him in the exact same way, beads of moisture trembling on the metal. It was a twin to the one before, or the same one, passed again. He checked the clock, 12:27 a.m. The engine tone stayed steady. The RPM gauge sat where it always sat during this kind of climb. There were no shudders, no jolts, no mechanical indications that anything at all was wrong. The world inside the cab was normal. His own breathing sounded loud in his ears. Ahead, the suggestion of a curve formed in the fog, a familiar rightward bend, then a gentle left. He recognized the shape of it with unsettling clarity, the exact subtle angle of the guardrail, the particular way the light spread and then drew together again. He had driven this section once already tonight. The radio crackled again, a soft, desperate edge entering that unseen driver's voice. Anyone else? Anyone? Hollow Ridge. I can't find the exit. I can't find anything. The weight of the truck pressed into the turn as he followed the road. He guided it with slow, careful movements, the way you might move through a dark room full of fragile objects. The fog slid along the sides of the cab in ripples, as if something were moving through it just beyond his vision. He tried to remember the last clear landmark he had passed, a gas station sign, a rest area, a town name on a board. There was nothing, just the recurring, gently climbing ribbon of highway and the indifferent white gaze of the mileage markers. He let the truck coast a little more, dropping another 5 miles per hour. The speedometer needle sank obediently. The fog did not thin, the world did not open up, the road did not end. The GPS still showed that thin purple line through nothing, the small triangular icon of his truck creeping steadily forward. The digital voice did not complain. There were no notification chimes, no recalculating message. According to the device, he was progressing normally toward a wait station, and then a fork back toward the main interstate. The clock said 12:27 a.m. His fingers felt strangely numb on the wheel, as if the leather had grown just a fraction more distant. In the mirrors, he could see the vague outline of his own trailer lights, their red glow smudged by the moisture in the air, pooling a little on every imperfection in the road. On the radio, the other driver's breath rasped softly over the line. I tried to turn around, the voice said suddenly, clearly now as if some unseen barrier had thinned. But it's too narrow. The fog, my lights, they just bounce back. I keep seeing my own truck in front of me just out of reach, like I'm following myself. Elias' gaze flicked instinctively to the distance ahead, beyond the bright limit of his beams, into the dense whiteness. For a split second, he thought he saw something there. 2 faint red dots, far ahead and slightly elevated. Tail lights, hanging in the mist like twin stars obscured by cloud. They blinked once, dimmed, then were gone. His mouth went dry. He listened to the other driver breathe, long, slow inhales, shaky exhales. There was no engine noise in the background, No rumble of tires, just the sound of someone sitting very still, somewhere, wrapped in white and waiting for an answer that never came. "How long have you been up here?" Elias asked, his voice quieter now, as if the fog might be listening at the windows. A pause. "Then, my log says it's Tuesday." There was a stretch of silence so complete that even the static seemed to pull back, leaving only the murmur of tires and wind and engine. Elias considered his own day. He had picked up the load in the late afternoon. He had checked the straps, signed the paperwork, adjusted the mirrors. He had watched the sun sink behind a row of warehouses, staining the sky orange and purple. He had merged onto the interstate under a deepening blue dome, stars quietly winking into existence. The date on his own log sat on the clipboard beside him, red-inked and neat. Tuesday. The road curved again. The fog thickened again. Another mileage marker emerged. 46. The numbers were stark and white against the green, small beads of water, trembling on their edges like tiny, uncertain thoughts. He did not look at the clock this time. For a while they traveled together, he and the unseen driver, one truck moving and one truck apparently still, both suspended in the same clouded space. The radio carried only breathing and the occasional faint, broken syllable. Elias said nothing more. There was nothing useful to say. Ahead in the mist, those faint twin red dots bloomed again, tiny pricks of color in the shifting white. They hovered, always just at the furthest edge of visibility, as if waiting. His foot hovered over the brake pedal. He did not accelerate. He did not slow. He maintained his gentle, cautious speed, watching the phantom lights drift in and out of existence like a heartbeat. At some point, he could not have said when, the air changed again. The moisture on the windshield thinned. The fog lightened, going from dense white cotton to thin gray gauze. The shapes of trees sharpened, their branches more defined. The guardrail glinted more clearly, reflecting the beams in cleaner lines. The world seemed to push itself gradually back into focus. The road straightened. A bright green sign emerged out of nowhere and swept past on the right, its letters crisp and solid. Way station 1 mile. Elias exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The engine's sound was suddenly loud again, present, grounded. Even the coffee in the mug seemed to rattle with more conviction. He reached for the radio. "Breaker in Hollow Ridge," he said, keeping his voice even. "Way station's a mile ahead for northbound. Fog's clearing up on my end. You seeing that now?" The silence on the other end was complete. He waited, counted slowly to 10. Static murmured, rising and falling like breaths. "Southbound driver in Hollow Ridge," he tried again. "You still with me?" Nothing, just the distant crackle of other conversations on far-off channels, none of them resolving into sense. The wait station appeared ahead, its illuminated sign floating in the last of the thinning mist. The small structure sat under bright white lamps that cut the fog to shreds, leaving nothing but damp pavement and the gleam of painted lines. A lone attendant in a reflective vest stepped out of the booth as Elias eased the rig onto the scale, their breath puffing faintly in the cool air. The world had reset itself. The clock on the dash read 1:43 a.m. "Quiet night?" the attendant asked through the open window, their voice muffled slightly by the lingering fog and the hum of idling trucks. Elias hesitated. The CB radio beside him whispered aimlessly to itself, its green light steady. "Yeah," he said at last, "mostly fog up in the pass." The attendant nodded knowingly. "Hollow Ridge does that," they said. "Messes with your head. Time gets funny up there, or so folks say." Elias watched the numbers on the big digital scale screen, each digit ticking into place like the slow, steady counting of something unseen. "You ever hear someone stuck up there?" he asked quietly, "saying they keep passing the same markers, same stretch." The attendant considered him with a faint furrow in their brow, then shook their head. "Sometimes folks say they see lights ahead that they can't quite catch up to," they replied. Old stories about phantom trucks, drivers who never made it down. People like to talk. Their tone was calm, not dismissive, just matter of fact, like someone mentioning that a certain diner was rumored to have good pie. Elias nodded once, signed his ticket, rolled off the scale and back onto the dark highway, the fog now reduced to low, scattered veils across the fields. He drove on through the rest of the night, the road opening ahead of him in familiar ways, the mileage markers ticking up in sensible, orderly succession. The radio carried the usual chatter again. Weather updates, casual jokes, bored drivers keeping one another awake with soft talk of nothing. Only once, hours later, did he reach for the CB again. "Hollow Ridge southbound driver," he said into the quiet of his cab, though the pass was long behind him now. "This is northbound. I made it through." He waited. Static answered, low, restless, uncommitted. "If you're still up there," he added, more to the road itself than to any particular ear, "keep your lights on. Someone will see you." He turned the volume dial down a little, letting the radio's murmur sink into the background. Outside, dawn began to thin the dark at the horizon, pale gray light pushing gently against the last of the night. Behind him, somewhere in the hills and their curling white veils, Hollow Ridge Pass lay in its familiar place, a narrow strip of asphalt threading through stone and fog. The markers stood where they always stood. The curves turned where they always turned. And every once in a while, on nights when the mist was especially thick and the clock seemed especially stubborn, some driver would swear they had been there longer than they should have, that the same bend had held them, that the same number on the same small green sign had greeted them again and again. Most people chalked it up to fatigue, to tricks of the mind in the soft, muffled hours before dawn. But sometimes, when the air was cool and the ground still remembered the sun, there were those who said they could see, far ahead in the foggy distance, a faint pair of red lights, forever just out of reach. Story number 2. The highway at night was a long, low whisper, the kind that slipped past the windows and under the doors and settled in the corners of the cab. Out here between towns, the road forgot about billboards and exit ramps and simply stretched, straight and patient, across the plains. The sky was a broad, blank darkness with only a scattering of stars, and the earth lay flat and open on either side, fields gone to stubble and shadow. Inside the truck, the world was smaller and kinder. The dashboard glowed in soft greens and ambers, bathing the interior in a muted, steady light. The heater sighed through the vents in warm, rhythmic breaths, carrying the smell of old fabric, engine heat, and the faint sweetness of the vanilla air freshener that hung from the radio knob. The hum of the tires on asphalt was constant, a soothing, low-frequency sound that seemed to vibrate up through the floor and into the driver's bones. Mariah kept her eyes on the ribbon of pavement ahead, fingers light on the wheel. This stretch of state highway was familiar to her, a back route that slipped under the main interstates, used by those who knew it, ignored by those who didn't. It was quieter, a little lonelier, and on nights like this, that suited her. The clock on the dash read 1:52. The radio was turned down low, tuned to an oldie station that drifted in and out of clarity, the guitars and soft drums occasionally smudged by a sigh of static. Her coffee, lukewarm now, sat in its holder, the ceramic mug chipped just slightly around the rim where it had bumped against a metal step months ago. The fog began as a distant, vague thing, like breath on glass far ahead. She noticed how the farthest points of her headlights seemed to dissolve instead of landing on solid ground. The edges of the world softened. A low-lying mist spread across the fields, silvered by the moonless sky, pooling in shallow dips and along ditches. She had driven in fog before, river fog, ground fog, thick mountain shrouds that turned the world to opal. But this had a different quality. It rose from the soil in slow curls, hanging just at the right height to swallow the bases of fence posts and the lower trunks of trees. It flowed onto the road, thin at first, then thicker, until it lay across the asphalt like someone had unrolled a long, pale carpet. She eased her foot off the accelerator, letting her speed drop. The beam of her headlights compressed into a shorter, more luminous tunnel. Beyond that bright oval, the fog became a wall, opaque and softly glowing, reflecting her own lights back at her. A green sign appeared suddenly out of the mist, drifting into view like a ghostly sail. Rest Area 2, MILES. Mariah considered her own fatigue, the slight heaviness at the back of her eyes, the way her shoulders ached just enough to make themselves known. The idea of stopping, of stepping out into cool air, of stretching her legs, of using a real restroom instead of the cramped cab facilities, had a quiet appeal. She flicked her blinker on out of habit, even though there was no one behind her to see it. The soft ticking filled the cab, measuring seconds in calm, mechanical beats. The fog thickened as she drove those 2 miles. Trees at the roadside became indistinct smears of darker gray. The reflectors embedded in the pavement winked in and out, little coins of light. The world beyond the edges of the beam was gone now, surrendered to a uniform, glowing whiteness. Another sign appeared, Rest Area 1 2 mile. Its lettering shone bright and damp, haloed by moisture in the air. She watched for the turnoff with a kind of cautious relief, foot hovering over the brake. The entrance ramp emerged out of nowhere, its curve gentle, the arrow on the accompanying sign pointing right, its green face dripping with condensation. She guided the truck onto the exit, tires making a softer hiss as the pavement texture changed. The ramp rose slightly, curling away from the main road and into the dense fog, which seemed even thicker off the highway, as if it had collected in this small, sheltered pocket of land. The rest area lights glowed in the mist before the buildings themselves came into view, tall sodium lamps casting pale, honey-colored circles into the whiteness. As she drew closer, their light fractured and diffused, turning the fog to slow-moving, golden clouds drifting around invisible poles. The parking area opened up around her, its boundaries hidden by the swirling white. Ghostly shapes resolved into parked rigs, lined in neat rows, their trailers looming like silent, slumbering whales. Red and yellow marker lights glowed along their sides and tops, hazy halos in the fog. A few smaller vehicles, cars and pickups, crouched among them, their forms softened, all sharpness taken away. Engines were off. No idle rumbles, no faint music leaking from cracked windows, no slam of distant doors. Just the soft push of her own engine and the faint, almost inaudible patter of mist settling on metal and glass. Mariah eased her truck into an open slot between 2 larger rigs, aligning carefully, though she could barely see their outlines. The fog made distance tricky, objects looming closer, and then seeming to recede as she edged forward. Finally, the angle in her mirrors looked right, the trailer straight, the front bumper an even distance from the faded white line. She set the brake. The engine wound down to a low, contented thrum, then quieted as she shut it off. The sudden absence of vibration made the cab feel strangely weightless, floating in its own bubble of still air. Without the engine's noise, the silence outside became noticeable, almost its own sound, thick, muffled, a layered quiet. It reminded her of standing in a snowstorm as a child, when the world seemed to pull its blanket up over its ears and rest. She grabbed her jacket from the back of the seat, pulling it on, feeling the familiar soft lining slide against her skin. The cab lights clicked on with a warm glow when she opened the door. Fog edged toward the opening immediately, curious fingers reaching in, cool and damp against her face as she climbed down the metal steps. The ground was clammy under her boots, slick but not wet enough to splash. The air smelled of damp asphalt, cold metal, and the faint, lingering traces of diesel and hot rubber from trucks that had settled here hours ago. Her breath joined the fog, visible in little puffs before being absorbed into the general whiteness. From where she stood on the ground, the parked trucks around her were little more than giant shadows, their outlines soft and undefined. Their marker lights were low, diffuse embers in the mist. High above, the glowing heads of the light poles were just bright smears, like someone had smudged the sky with a thumb dipped in gold. The main building of the rest area revealed itself as she walked, a low, rectangular structure with big glass windows and a peaked roof, the architecture of 100 such places across the country. Its interior lights were on, yellow and gentle, making the windows appear as warm, hazy rectangles. Her footsteps made a dull, hollow sound on the concrete walkway. Somewhere far off, a ventilation unit hummed, its blades hidden, its presence only known by the steady, sooting noise. No voices, no doors closing, no footsteps but her own. Inside, the building was pleasantly warm. The fog clung to her jacket for a moment, then began to dissolve, leaving tiny droplets that caught the light. The entry door's side shut behind her, separating the thick, damp silence of the lot from the faintly buzzing brightness within. Fluorescent panels in the ceiling emitted a soft, even light, the kind that made everything a little washed out but also reassuringly visible. The floor was smooth tile, mottled gray and beige, gleaming faintly with an almost freshly mopped sheen. A row of vending machines hummed along one wall, bright rectangles of packaged snacks and drinks glowing behind glass. A few faded travel brochures sat in neat fans on a metal rack. A bulletin board held dog-eared notices: lost pets, church suppers, a flyer for a long-past charity car wash. To the left, a cluster of tables and molded plastic chairs. To the right, a corridor leading to restrooms, a family room, and a door marked employees only. On the far wall, a television hung from a bracket near the ceiling, its screen showing an old black and white movie with the sound turned way down. Grainy figures moved across some city street, their lips forming words she couldn't hear. A clock hung above the television, its face plain, its red second hand frozen between two marks. The time read 2:14. Mariah checked her own watch out of habit, expecting some discrepancy, some oddness that would make a good story later. Her watch, digital and unremarkable, also read 2:14. She moved down the corridor toward the restrooms. The air back here smelled of disinfectant and paper towels, a clean, sharp scent that tickled the back of her nose. The women's room was bright and tidy, its mirror spotless, its stalls all empty. Somewhere within the wall, water flowed in a dull, steady rush, heating systems or distant pipes doing their unseen work. As she stood at the sink, washing her hands, the automatic hand dryer suddenly roared to life beside her, blasting warm air at an empty space. She glanced at it, then at the motion sensor, but no one else had entered. The dryer blew for its full-timed cycle, then cut off abruptly. Little things, she thought, faulty sensors, old buildings, nothing in it. In the corridor again, she paused by the vending machines. Their fluorescent tubes buzzed faintly behind the glass, making the plastic wrappers on the snacks shine. They were all arranged too perfectly, every chip bag upright and facing forward, no half-empty rows, no bent corners, no signs that hands had fumbled around in there tonight. The drink machine's digital display glowed too in unwavering red, never skipping, never dimming. Condensation beaded on the inside of the glass, little droplets gathered along the metal coils. She fed a couple of bills into the payment slot, listening to the whirring and tugging inside as the machine accepted her money. The button for coffee blinked invitingly, its little light a warm orange. She pressed it, and the machine began its careful practice process, cup dropping with a soft thud, gurgling as the drink poured, a faint, enticing scent of cheap but comforting coffee filling the air. The cup steamed in her hand. The heat seeped through the sides in a slow wave, warming her fingers. She took a tentative sip. It tasted exactly as she expected it to, thin, slightly bitter, but hot and real. The building remained empty. She walked back to the seating area and lowered herself into one of the plastic chairs. It creaked lightly under her weight. From here, she could see the TV more clearly. The same scene played out again. A woman in a hat walking quickly down a shadowed street, glancing over her shoulder. A car passed. A lamppost stood at the corner. The woman turned, vanished between buildings. The screen flickered, a brief shiver of static on the edges, then settled. The scene began again. The woman in the hat, the glance, the car, the lamppost. No credits, no channel logo, just the same grainy movement on an endless loop. The clock above it still read 2:14. Mariah listened. The building made small, reasonable noises. The compressor in a vending machine kicked on somewhere to her left, a low, throbbing hum. The fluorescent lights gave off their faint, insect-like buzz. Air moved in the vents in soft, measured breaths. Somewhere behind the employee's only door, something metal expanded with a soft ping as it cooled. Through the glass of the front windows, the fog pressed against the world, turning everything beyond the few yards of lit walkway into a blank, pale void. Her own truck was invisible, the hulking silhouettes of the other rigs reduced to vague, dark forms. A flicker of sound, unfamiliar in the stillness, tickled her senses. It was faint, a kind of soft, grainy murmur coming from nowhere in particular. At first she thought it was part of the television's looping scene, some artifact of the old film's audio track. But as she listened more closely, tilting her head, the quality of it resolved into something else. Voices very far away, filtered through static. Like a CB radio, turned down almost to nothing. There was no CB set in the building she could see. No dispatch office, no desk, no glowing microphone. The sound seemed to seep from the corners, from the vents, from the space where the walls met the ceiling. She held her coffee a little tighter, feeling the warmth in her palms, and listened. Eastbound marker, the words were broken, slipping in and out. Anyone copy thick, can't see. Another voice overlaid, impossible to separate fully. Rest area lights, no one think aisle. Then the sound guttered, like a candle wick drowning in wax, and receded back into an indistinct hiss. The building hummed quietly around her. She sat for what felt like a long time. The coffee cooled slowly in her hands. Her shoulders relaxed, spine loosening against the curve of the chair. Tiredness settled over her in a gentle, heavy way, insisting but not urgent. This place, for all its strangeness, was warm, and she had been driving a long time. When at last she looked up at the clock again, its face still read 2:14. Her watch, when she brought her wrist closer to her eyes, blinked 2:14 back at her, unbothered. The human mind, trained on schedules and appointments and miles per hour, did a small, private calculation and came up with a suggestion. Perhaps the battery had died. Perhaps the clock had stopped. Perhaps she was more exhausted than she realized and had misremembered glancing at the dash earlier. It did not, however, offer any explanation for why the second hand up on that wall was caught between ticks, suspended in a moment that refused to finish. Mariah stood, joints crackling softly, and crossed back to the corridor window. The fog beyond had not shifted. It still lay thick and close, a gently rippling curtain of white. No shapes moved within it. No headlights pierced it from incoming vehicles. The parking lot lamps glowed as steadily as they had when she first arrived, their halos unchanged. It was possible, she thought, that other drivers slept in the cabs of those trucks outside. Curtains drawn, radios off, cell phones face down. The world could be full of people and yet feel utterly deserted. She had learned that long ago. Still, something in the stillness of this place felt different. As if the rest area existed inside a small pocket, a slowed-down heartbeat between two normal ones. She returned to her truck, deciding that even if her watch had stopped, her body knew it was time to move on. The automatic doors sighed open, breathing a last bit of warm air onto her back as she stepped into the cool dampness outside. The fog wrapped around her, soft and immediate. The world shrank to the span of a few arm lengths. Her breaths joined it, little clouds folded into the larger one. The concrete beneath her boots felt slightly springy, as if holding a thin film of water just under its surface. She walked toward where she knew her truck to be. The shapes of other rigs loomed and fell away, their edges hard to fix. One had a cartoon decal barely visible through the fog. She remembered it from when she'd parked, a smiling frog on the side of the cab. The familiarity anchored her, a small reassurance that things had not moved while she was inside. Her own truck emerged from the mist as a familiar outline, the curve of the hood, the angle of the side mirror, the little crack in the corner of the windshield. The transport company's logo ghosted faintly along the trailer's side. She climbed the steps, metal cold under her hands, and pulled the door open. Warm, faintly coffee-scented air greeted her. When she shut the door behind her and turned the lock, the cab again became a self-contained world. Small, controlled, known. For a moment she simply sat there, hands resting on the wheel, listening. The outside silence pressed gently at the windows. The building's lights glowed dimly through the fog in her rearview mirror, little squares of yellow in a sea of white. The dashboard clock read 2:14. She started the engine. It rumbled to life without protest, gauges sweeping up to their marks. The air vents exhaled, clearing the last of the chill from the cab. Somewhere under her feet, a tiny vibration told of fuel lines and pumps, everything working as it should. She signaled out of habit again and pulled slowly through the lot, the truck moving like a ghost in another ghost, massive but tentative. The outline of the exit lane appeared ahead, the painted arrows on the pavement dim but visible, guiding her back toward the merge ramp. For a moment, as she followed those arrows, it felt as if the road were curving not back toward the highway, but in a looping arc, back toward the same parking area she had just left. The fog made distances uncertain. The lamps seemed to stand in the same places. The building's glow stayed stubbornly fixed in her mirror instead of sliding off to one side as it should. She reached the end of the lane and realized, with a slow, creeping understanding, that she had circled back to the center of the lot. She tried again, circling wider this time, following the painted lines more carefully, watching the vague, dark shapes of other trucks for orientation. The fog swallowed perspective, made close things seem far and far things seem right at hand. Again, she found the arrows, the slight incline of the exit lane, the comforting logic of signage leading her. Again, the lamp posts arranged themselves into a familiar pattern. The building sat exactly where it had before, its windows glowing with the unchanging loop of light from inside. It was as if the lot itself had folded, returning her to where she had started. On the third attempt, she slowed down even more, creeping along at a cautious, almost painful pace. She focused not on the big structures, the uncertain hulks and blurred lights, but on the smaller details. A crack in the pavement with grass pushing through. A discarded paper cup pressed flat near one curb. The glint of a lost coin at the base of a light pole. This time, when she reached the lane that should lead to the exit, there was a subtle shift. The slope felt slightly steeper under the tires, the angle of the light different. The fog ahead thinned, not much, but enough that she could see the faint geometry of the main highway beyond. Parallel lines of reflective stripping, the dull band of median fence. She eased forward. The ramp joined the highway with a soft, familiar merge. The thickest fog clung around the rest area entrance, trailing wisps along the shoulder, but beyond it the air cleared in degrees, as if someone were turning down a dial. When she glanced into her left mirror, the entrance to the rest area was already disappearing, enfolded in a soft, luminous white that hid the lamps and the building and the parked trucks entirely. The clock on her dash ticked over to 2:15. Farther down the road, where the fog had thinned to a mere suggestion, she passed a blue sign on the right-hand side. Its reflective surface caught her headlights crisply, the letters sharp and new-looking despite the hour. It read, "Next rest area 37 miles." The section above, where sometimes another rest area was listed, was blank. Out of habit, she reached for the CB, its mic coiled neatly beside the seat. The radio was on, a quiet undercurrent of voices and static beneath the hum of the road. She clicked the button and spoke. "Northbound just past the last rest stop out here," she said, tone mild. "Fog's thick as soup back there. Anyone else catch that?" A driver's voice answered after a moment, warm and a little amused. "Negative, northbound. Fog's been clear on this stretch for hours. You sure you stopped at a rest area? Closest one on that side's been shut down since before my time on this run. Just an old turnout and a porta-john nobody uses." Mariah's fingers tightened slightly on the mic. She let the question come out naturally, as though disinterested. "They tear the buildings down. Far as I know, there weren't any left by the time I started. Just foundations and an empty lot last I saw it. State put up a big closed sign couple years back. Been talking about reopening, but you know how that goes." She made an acknowledging sound and set the mic back in its cradle. The radio resumed its low, companionable murmur. The road stretched on, dark and solid. The fog, now reduced to scattered wisps along culverts and low spots, slid past like something half-remembered. The heater kept the cab warm, her coffee in the cup holder throwing off a faint, comforting scent. Somewhere ahead, another blue sign would appear with its simple, unhurried promise of the next place to stop. Behind her, somewhere in that pocket of low, heavy cloud, the rest area sat in its quiet glow. Inside, the vending machines hummed. The television played its single, looping scene. The clock on the wall held its breath at 2:14, that second hand forever caught between two marks. Trucks might pull in now and then, their drivers guided by a fog too dense to ignore, by a tiredness too deep to push through. They would find warmth, and coffee that tasted exactly as it should, and bathrooms that were brighter and cleaner than most. Time would loosen its grip there. The outside world would hush. And then when they were ready, or when they weren't but had to be, the road would open again and the fog would thin, and the exit ramp would truly lead back to the highway. Most of them would never mention the way the clock didn't move, the way the same scene played over and over on the silent screen, the way voices seemed to hum in the walls, speaking miles away. They would call it a good rest, a quiet stop, a small kindness on a long, empty night. But on certain drives years later, when the fog rolled in thick and low, and the miles between exits grew too long, some would remember that warm yellow light out there, somewhere in the white. A place that might still be waiting at 2:14, doors open, coffee ready, lights humming, for any driver who wandered just far enough off the regular road. Story number 3. The Flatwater Causeway did not feel like a road so much as a line drawn across nothing. On either side of the highway, the lake spread out into darkness, an unseen expanse trickling away toward invisible reeds and low, sleeping islands. The bridge was long, 20 miles of concrete and guardrail, a straight shot between two distant shores. At night, it was only suggested by the thrum of tires, the faint sway of the trailer, and the regular appearance of white lane markings in the beam of the headlights. Jonah had been on the causeway for 10 minutes when the fog started to gather. It came up from the black surface of the water in slow, coiling layers, at first just a softness at the edges of his vision. The distant sodium lamps marking the emergency pullouts lost their sharp halos, becoming blurred smudges of yellow. The higher beams of passing vehicles ahead vanished one by one, swallowed as if the air itself had developed depth. He nudged the steering wheel with the heel of his hand, keeping the rig centered. The refrigerated trailer hummed behind him, a cold box of produce and dairy making its cross-country journey. Inside the cab, the air was warm and dry, scented faintly with pine from the old air freshener clipped to an air vent. The dashboard was a quiet constellation of greens and reds, the speedometer needle resting at a patient, responsible 60. The causeway was famous in the region, not just for its length but for its fog. Warmer water and cooler night air conspired every autumn and spring to wrap it in thick, luminous bands, turning the straight, simple drive into something that demanded respect. Truckers told stories about it in diners. How one moment you could see the glitter of stars reflected on the lake, and the next you could barely see your own hood ornament. There was another story, too, quieter but persistent. It was about Channel 13 on the CB. According to the older hands, you didn't flip to 13 on flat water, not during a fog, not if you could help it. The tale went that back in '79 there had been a bad pileup, fog-thick night, 3 rigs and a handful of cars tangled in an invisible knot somewhere around the 13-mile marker. No one on the present-day runs talked about what happened in detail. There was no need. The caution lived in the way they said, keep it clear through the 13. Jonah kept his own set tuned to 19, the familiar murmur of other drivers, voices a kind of invisible convoy that made the long hours less hollow. Tonight, the chatter had thinned with the traffic. A weather update here, a joke there, someone complaining about a backorder at a warehouse 2 states over. The usual. As the fog thickened into a proper white veil, the voices faded. The radio's volume knob hadn't moved, but the words seemed to recede, as if spoken from farther away. He could still hear them, but faintly, as though through a layer of cotton. Outside, the beam of his headlights shortened until it was just a glowing spear of light striking a moving wall of gray. The road, at least, remained dry. His tires whispered along the concrete, and the subtle rise and fall of the bridge under its own weight gave the cab a slow, rocking motion. On some nights, that rhythm made him drowsy. Tonight, it just made him aware of how alone he was, suspended above dark water wrapped in a kind of luminous silence. He checked the mileage marker on the right as it emerged from the fog and slid away again. A small, damp-streaked green sign with a reflective flash of numbers. 11. 2 more and he'd be through the stretch, the old-timers liked to mention with a careful, sideways look. Jonah adjusted his grip on the wheel, pulling one hand back to wrap around his travel mug. The coffee inside had gone tepid, but he sipped it anyway, for the ritual more than the taste. The heater hummed. Somewhere behind the dashboard, plastic clicked softly as it settled in the temperature change. The CB crackled. For a moment he thought it was just the usual static that came with fog and distance. But then a voice pushed through, distorted, like something heard underwater. Causeway, anybody got eyes on that? The voice was male, the accent local but old-fashioned, rounded in a way he associated with recordings from another decade. Jonah glanced at the channel display out of habit, still on 19. He thumbed the mic but held it, not pressing the button. It was possible he was catching a skip, some distant signal bouncing weirdly in the damp air. He listened. Fog sittin' heavy. Watch your speed common up on 13. Got a 4-wheeler riding dumb up there, over. The sound quality was grainy, but the rhythm was right, easy, habitual CB talk. Jonah felt the back of his neck prickle. He hadn't heard anyone mention the mile number out loud on this leg. Not like that. Another voice came over the top of the first, crosstalk and overlap. Copy that, Redbird, I'm a mile back. Can barely make out your tail lights. This soup's something else tonight. The names, the phrasing, they had a flavor to them. Redbird. Soup, maybe not old so much as out of fashion. Like hearing somebody use a slang term he'd only ever read on a forum archive. The mileage marker on his right appeared, then vanished. 12. The fog closed behind it, thick and impenetrable. The world outside the cab narrowed to the concrete directly in front of him, the guardrail a vague, glistening suggestion at the edge of perception. There it is, the first voice said. Marker 13, you watch yourself now. The CB hissed softly. Jonah tilted his head, his eyes on the road ahead. He had not spoken into the mic, but he felt curiously as if he were part of the conversation, as if some part of the unseen exchange was angled toward him. The next marker rose up in his headlights, numbers beating with moisture like tiny pearls. 13. He passed it, the sign slipping away into the white behind him. The bridge kept going, straight and steady, the same as it had for the last 10 miles. There was no physical difference here, No bend, no narrowing, nothing to justify the stories. Still, his grip on the wheel tightened. A faint, irrational expectation fluttered in his chest, the sense that something should announce itself now, a change in the pitch of the engine, a different vibration in the tires, some marker of crossing into what exactly? He couldn't have said. The CB crackled again, more urgently. "Redbird, you're riding your brakes. You all right up there." Silence, then the pop and hiss of a keying mic. "Just don't like this is all. Feels thick. Lights don't seem to go nowhere. You see the pullout. We blow past that, I swear." There was a sound then, low and distant, like a long, drawn-out squeal. Not in Jonah's cab, not in his ears exactly, but in that strange, in-between space of the radio. The second voice swore softly, the words truncated by static. Jonah's heart picked up a beat. His own tires rolled on, untroubled, the bridge beneath him unbroken and dry. Yet his body reacted as if something large had just moved in his peripheral vision. He leaned forward, peering into the fog. For just a heartbeat, he thought he saw, out beyond his left mirror where there should have been only emptiness and open air, a string of lights. Amber marker lights, dull and smeared, hovering a few feet away as though there were another lane of traffic, another line of trucks riding in perfect parallel just outside his world. They glowed faintly, like embers glimpsed through gauze. Then they were gone. The hairs on his arm stood on end. He reached for the CB mic almost without. "Thinking, Breaker 19, he said, his own voice sounding too loud in the quiet cab. "You boys out on Flatwater Tucson, 13, you got your ears on." Silence. The static shifted, but no one answered him in that immediately familiar way of fellow drivers on the same stretch of night. He clicked the mic again, thumb resting on the talk button. "This is northbound, just rolled past 13 on the causeway. Fog's pretty heavy. You folks still out here?" The reply came not as an answer to his question, but as if it were continuing a conversation that had never included him. "I can't see the rail," Rudbud's voice higher now, frayed at the edges. "I can't, where's the rail? I'm druffdone." Another squeal, that same long, unreal sound, followed by a deep, echoing thud that seemed to reverberate through the static, through the wires, through the very air. Jonah flinched, though nothing in his physical world had changed. The rig tracked straight and true. His headlights shone on the unbroken white line to his right, perfectly placed. His mirrors reflected only his own trailer, a muted rectangle. "Rudbud," the second driver's voice was smaller now, strangled. "Rudbud, come back. You with me, brother." The CB went to a soft, cloudy hiss. Jonah swallowed, his mouth very dry. The story of the 79 pileup floated back to him, unbidden in snatches. Fog, 13. A rig that went sideways, breaking the invisible flow of traffic. More lights piling into it before anyone could grasp what had happened. The old-timers never lingered on it. They just said it once and then went back to their coffee. He checked his speed. 50. He eased it down, not abruptly, just enough to widen the margin between him and whatever might be ahead. The bridge was empty as far as he could see, but that was hardly comforting when he could only see a truck length and a half. In his mirrors, the fog glowed with his own red lights. Somewhere far behind, a faint pair of white beams struggled onto the bridge, then disappeared into the murk. He was not entirely alone, but it felt as if he were driving inside a dream. The mileage marker 14 emerged at the edge of his lights. He watched it pass, the numbers clean and clear, the sign unchanged by whatever haunted the CB waves. Static whispered, then very faintly another voice, quieter, older. "Flatwater northbound, watch yourselves through the soup now. If you hear us, we're just trying again, I guess." The tone was indescribable, tired and patient, and something else, something like regret worn smooth by time. Jonah could not tell if it was the second driver, older now, or someone entirely different. He didn't answer, not out of fear exactly, but out of a strange, sudden respect, as if he'd stumbled onto a private ritual. The fog held steady for a few more miles, then began to thin, its dense white softening into light gray streamers. The guardrails re-emerged properly on either side, wet and real. The black surface of the lake showed itself in dark, gently undulating patches beyond the beams of his lights. By the time he reached the far shore, the world had widened again. Trees appeared, then the suggestion of low buildings, then the orange glow of a service plaza off to the right. The bridge ended with no fanfare, just a subtle change in the feel of the pavement. On impulse, Jonah took the exit, following the short curl of ramp into the plaza's lot. The fog washed off his truck in lazy coils as he slowed, droplets of moisture glistening on his side mirrors. A handful of cars were parked near the small brick building, its windows lit with a sturdy, yellow light. A single other rig sat idling further out, its marker lights winking. Inside, the plaza was a familiar mix of fuel smell, fluorescent light, and stale coffee. A rack of maps no one really needed anymore lined one wall. Coolers hummed quietly. Behind the counter, an older man in a worn ball cap and a polo with the plaza's logo counted bills, the motions practiced and unhurried. "Fog out bad?" the attendant asked as Jonah brought a coffee and a bottled water up to the register. "On the causeway," Jonah said, "thick as I've seen it." He hesitated, then added, "You ever hear anything odd out there?" The man's eyes flicked up, studying him briefly. "Odd how?" "On the radio," Jonah said, "like you're listening in on a conversation that already happened." The attendant's gaze shifted past him for a second, toward the dark glass doors and the invisible lake beyond. He sighed, the sound small but genuine. "Been here 15 years, he said quietly. "You hear things nights like this. Drivers come in, white as sheets, swear they picked up chatter from that wreck in '79. Say they heard the whole thing like it was happening right then. Some of 'em knew details they shouldn't. Old CB handles, company names that don't exist no more." Jonah's fingers tightened around the styrofoam cup, the heat pressing into his palms. "What do you tell them?" he asked. The man shrugged, ringing up the coffee. "Same thing I'll tell you, that maybe sounds like light, gets bent, trapped. Maybe there's pockets out there where it just circles round a while, looking for somebody with their ears open." He slid the change across, coins clinking softly. "Or maybe," he added, "some folks do like how quick the world moves on. Maybe they're just trying to tap the glass now and then. Tell the next guy to slow down through 13. Jonah stepped back out into the night a few minutes later. The air here was almost clear, just a hint of mist clinging low to the grass. The causeway lights in the distance were dim, their bases hidden in lingering fog. He climbed back into his cab, shut the door, and sat for a moment without turning the key. The CB was still on, its display a calm, green square in the dark. He reached out and with deliberate care, turned the channel selector from 19 to 13. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the gentle hiss of empty airwaves. Then very faintly, as if coming from the far end of a long tunnel, a voice. "Northbound, you mind yourself through the soup. We're out here best we can be." It could have been imagination. It could have been atmospheric skip, or a prank, or some trucker on the opposite shore telling ghost stories to pass the night. Jonah left it there for another minute, listening. When nothing else came, he returned the dial to 19, starter key turning under his fingers, engine rumbling awake. Back on the highway, the causeway stretched away behind him, a pale, low band hanging over the dark water. Other drivers would cross it before dawn, their headlights pushing tunnels through the fog. Some would hear only static and their own thoughts. Some would keep their radios off altogether. And some, now and then, when the night was very still, and the fog lay especially thick over mile 13, would swear that a voice they couldn't quite place had come over the line to tell them to ease up on the throttle, to mind the rail, to remember that even on a straight, familiar road, the past had a way of lingering, patient and unseen, just beyond the edge of the beam. Story number 4. The mountain road fell away in long, deliberate curves, each one unfurling a little more of the valley's darkness below. Overhead, the sky was a heavy, moonless lid, the stars smothered by a slow-moving ceiling of cloud. The only light came from the truck's own headlights, carving a muted path ahead, and the intermittent glint of reflective signs leaning in from the shoulder like quiet, watchful figures. Kai rode the grade in low gear, one hand resting on the wheel, the other near the shifter. The engine's brake growled in a steady, controlled rhythm, the sound pulsing through the floor and up into his feet. The trailer followed obediently behind, a loaded, quiet weight, its refrigerated unit a soft, distant hum under the main vibration. Inside the cab, the air was warm and faintly dry, the heater exhaling in measured sighs. A scratched plastic St. Christopher medal swung gently from the visor, catching and losing the dashboard's green glow with each small bump. It was just past 2 in the morning, deep in the hour where the night feels most convinced of itself. Snow had flirted with the pass earlier in wet, lazy flakes, dusting the shoulders but never quite sticking to the travel lanes. Now, as Kai rounded another long, left-hand curve, something else began to gather on the road, something neither dry nor exactly wet, a whiteness that was not snow and not quite cloud. Fog rose from the ravines and tree-lined cuts, seeping onto the asphalt in low, creeping tendrils. It pooled along the outer edges first, sliding over the guardrails like someone pouring milk down a dark wall. Then it began to thicken, drawing itself upward, folding layer upon layer until the air ahead was a softly luminous gray. Kai eased off the throttle a little more, letting the rig slow. The grade here was steep, the warning signs posted miles back, 6% next 7 miles. Truck stay in low gear. Runaway RAMPS ahead. He had driven it in summer in clear weather when the views were wide and the dangers obvious. Tonight, everything beyond his own beams felt hidden and close. The fog took his high beams and threw them back at him in a wall of blinding, glowing cotton. He dropped back to low, letting the light contract into a shorter, clearer tunnel. The painted lane lines ghosted in and out beneath him, white and yellow bands appearing just in time to prove the road was still where it should be. On the CB, a few voices still drifted over Channel 19, but they were thin now, as if speaking from a different plane of air. "Slick up top, boys, watch your step," someone drawled. "Copy that little bit of frost back there," another replied. "Fog's the real kicker, can't see 10 feet ahead." Their words faded beneath the steady hum of Kai's own rig. His hands felt steady. He had done grades like this before, learned to trust the bite of his brakes and the logic of gravity when treated with cautious respect. Still, the fog had a way of making everything feel closer. The curve warning seemed to appear with less warning. The guardrail, when he glimpsed it, loomed like the edge of the world. A new sign materialized out of the gray on his right, its reflective face shining wetly. "Fog area next 3 miles. Use low beam. Next runaway ramp 2 miles." He read it out of habit, confirming what he already knew. Somewhere down this invisible grade, a strip of escape lane waited, an uphill track of deep gravel designed to swallow the momentum of any truck whose brakes had lost the argument with gravity. He had never used one. Most drivers hadn't. You hoped you never had to. The road curved gently right, then wound back left, the pattern slow and careful. The fog thickened until even the tops of the pines on either side were gone, reduced to vague, darker smears in the luminous wash. Moisture beaded on the mirrors, dissolving the orange glimmer of his own marker lights into soft, floating halos. The brake temperature gauge edged up a little but stayed in the safe band. He feathered the pedal, checked his speed 45, then 40. The grade pulled. The rig pushed. It was a negotiation, not a fight. Somewhere below, out in the blank space where the valley should be, a faint orange pulse flickered, then vanished. Hazard lights, maybe, caught through a thinning in the fog. It was impossible to tell how far. The CB hissed, then snapped alive with a sharp, anxious voice. "Southbound at mile 74, you got a mess common up," the voice shouted. Four-wheeler spun out across both lanes, looks like he kissed the rail pretty good. Fog's sittin' right on top of it, you won't see nothing till you're on M. Another voice cut in, breathless. "We're nowhere to go, man. Shoulders are snowed over. They got troopers trying to block, but this fog." The transmission crackled apart, words torn to pieces by interference. Kai's grip on the wheel tightened. He glanced at the GPS. A soft chime had sounded a minute ago, approaching mile 74. His position icon slid slowly along a pale digital ribbon that traced the highway's curve. He knew how fast a loaded truck could eat up a mile on a downgrade. He pictured unseen hazard lights. A sedan slid sideways, a line of brake lamps materializing out of nowhere just ahead. The next sign came and went in a blur of reflective lettering. "Runaway ramp 12 mile." He didn't need it. His speed was controlled. His brakes held. The rig was solid under him. And yet, in the fog-thick stillness, the thought of coming suddenly onto a blind tangle of lights and stopped steel sat in his chest like a weight. His mind ran the possibilities with the quickness of experience. Hit the brakes hard now, and he risked a skid of his own, a long, helpless slide toward whatever waited in the mist. Try to thread the needle between stalled vehicles, trusting instinct and luck. Or he saw the sign for the runaway ramp a breath before he passed it. A bright yellow diamond with a black outline of a steep hill and a truck climbing it. An arrow pointing right. A smaller sign beneath. Truck escape ramp 500 FT. The exit lane appeared out of the fog to his right. A dark, yawning swath veering upward and away, its start marked by posts with reflectors that flashed like low stars. He had just enough time to decide. His foot pressed down, not on the brake but on the turn signal. The soft tick-tick-tick joined the cabin's murmur. He guided the rig toward the escape lane, feeling the rumble strip buzz under the tires, the trailer's weight leaning, then following. The ramp's gravel met his front wheels with a crunch like breaking glass. The deep, loose bed grabbed at his tires, dragging at the momentum in a firm, uncompromising embrace. The grade turned upward sharply, the nose of his truck tilting as though it were trying to climb into the fog itself. Kai kept it straight, centered between the low, timbered sides. The engine's brakes snarled as he let the gears ride. The sensation was strange. He was still moving forward and upward, but everything in his body insisted he should already have stopped. The gravel hissed and churned beneath the wheels. The truck staggered, slowed. And yet the ramp kept going. From the highway, these ramps always looked short, just long enough to bleed off speed and stop a runaway rig. Here, inside it, the climb stretched out unnaturally. The fog thickened until the headlights seemed to shine directly into a blank wall a few feet in front of the bumper, the light swallowed whole. His side mirrors showed nothing but dense, glowing white. Not even the suggestion of the valley or the lower road remained. He expected to feel the tires bog down, the truck's motion arrested as the gravel finally won. Instead, the rumbling drag beneath him steadied, almost smoothed, like the feeling of transitioning from loose shoulder to hardpack. The incline eased from punishingly steep to just steep. The sensation of upward motion continued, unbroken. Kai's brow furrowed. He checked the speedometer, 10 miles per hour, then 8. Then steady at 7, the engine working, the weight of the load apparent but not overwhelming. There should not have been enough forward momentum left for this. Logic said he should have come to a complete, nose-up halt somewhere near the bottom. The CB hissed quietly, forgotten for the moment. The only sounds were the strained note of the engine, the muted crunch of whatever lay under his wheels, and the soft drumming of moisture on the cab's skin. A dim shape resolved itself ahead. At first he thought it was just a trick of the light, some dense knot of fog. As he drew closer, its outlines clarified. A large, box-like form squared off about the size of a trailer. He eased off the throttle instinctively. The truck crept forward, beams pushing against the opacity. An old rig emerged from the whiteness, angled slightly to the right, resting on what looked like the same gravel bed he rode. Its paint, once red, had faded to a tired, patchy rust. The logo on the side of the trailer was an old design from a company that had been bought out years ago, its lettering barely legible under a film of grime. Its cab windows were dark. Kai's headlights washed over it, revealing details as if unveiling something long. In storage, the tires were fully inflated, the mirrors intact. A thin skin of frost edged the chrome. There was no snow piled in its tracks, no drifted leaves, no vines clinging to its undercarriage, just a fine layer of dust and settled fog. He brought his own truck to a crawl, edging past carefully, his left-hand wheels almost kissing the low ramp wall. As he crept by, his side window came level with the other rig. Through the glass he could see the outline of the driver's seat, the steering wheel, the faint silhouette of a jacket hanging from a hook. The cab light was off. A coffee cup sat in the holder by the dash, half full and long cold, a ring of dried liquid marking its level. On the dashboard, barely visible in his sweep of light, a digital clock glowed faintly green. 2:07. His own dash clock, reflected in the side window, read 2:07 as well. He rolled past, the feeling of that parallel glowing number lingering behind his eyes. The ramp continued upward into the fog. More shapes began to appear, spaced irregularly along the climb. The blunt nose of a cabover from decades ago, its company name written in a font no one used anymore. A tanker with a logo from a fuel chain that had closed when Kai was a child. A refrigerated trailer like his own, but with an old, clattering unit bolted to its front. All of them sat at slight angles, as though they had come to rest in slow-motion emergencies and never left. None showed signs of violence, no twisted metal, no shattered windshields. They looked as if the drivers had simply parked in impossible places and stepped out into the fog. He searched for movement through each cab window as he passed. There was none, just empty seats, forgotten personal items, the faint suggestion of lives paused mid-route. An open logbook on one dash, pen resting in the spine. A pair of gloves folded neatly on another seat. A bright plastic lunchbox on the floor of a third. His own truck climbed on, engine working but steady, the incline starting to level beneath him. The fog around him pulsed with slow, almost breathing motions, thickening and thinning in subtle waves. For the first time since turning off the highway, he felt the urge to stop completely, to set the brake and sit still, and see what this place would do in response. But there was no shoulder here, no wide berth. The ramp was just wide enough for a single rig, hemmed in by timbers and fog. To stop halfway up felt like inviting something to close around him. Then just ahead, the gray opened. It was not sudden, not a snap from white to clear, but a gradual thinning, as if an unseen hand were teasing apart the fibers of a heavy curtain. The beam of his headlights pushed farther. The air grew less opaque. The sensation of up began to fade to flat. The ramp crested onto a small plateau. The gravel transitioned to a compacted, lighter surface, more like fine, pale dirt. The sides of the lane fell away. The fog above was still present, but high now, a shifting canopy just out of reach. The world around him emerged in soft-edged shapes. He found himself at the edge of a large, open area, high above where the highway should have been. The space was ringed with the vague forms of trees, their tops lost in the silver haze. The ground was level, and scattered across it, in a loose, irregular pattern, sat more trucks. They were parked in no particular order, facing different directions, as if each had simply rolled to a gentle stop at its own chosen angle. Their colors were muted by the fog, faded blues, dull whites, tarnished metallics. Their marker lights were off. No engines idled. No exhaust plumes rose. Kai brought his rig to a halt at the edge of this strange clearing. He set the brake, feeling the familiar clunk and hiss, the settle of weight. The sudden absence of motion made the quiet more apparent. The fog muffled even the sound of his own engine as it ticked down into an easy idle. For a long moment he simply sat, both hands still on the wheel, heart packing a little faster than before. His breath sounded loud in the cab. The heater's fan exhaled steadily. The refrigerated unit hummed. None of the other trucks moved. He killed the engine. It coughed once and fell silent. The resulting stillness was profound, like being inside a padded room. Even the faint, distant echoes of the valley wind, the occasional whistle he was used to hearing through poorly sealed windows, were gone. He could have stayed there inside his small, familiar space and waited for what he didn't know. Curiosity, however, had its own gravity. He pulled on his jacket, the fabric making a soft rasp in the close air, and reached for his flashlight. When he opened the door, the fog slid in gently, cool and damp, touching his face like cautious fingers. He climbed down, boots finding firm, slightly yielding ground. The smell out here was a mix of earth and old rubber, of metal that had sat too long without the cleansing heat of sun. His footsteps made almost no sound as he walked toward the nearest parked rig. Up close, the age differences between them became more obvious. One had the rounded lines and chrome-laden front of the 70s, its emblem dulled. Another bore a fleet logo he recognized from a company that had folded during his apprenticeship. A third, closer to his own era, had a dash layout he knew from a model discontinued just a few years back. He peered into a cab where the curtain was half-drawn. The bed inside was made, blanket smoothed by a careful hand. An open paperback lay face down near the pillow, its spine curved. A pair of socks, rolled together, waited on the narrow shelf. The dash clock in this one, analog and old-fashioned, showed 2:07, its red second hand ticking not at all, frozen between markers. In another, the digital display was blank, power long gone. Yet the microwave above the sleeper bunk still held a bowl pail with the film of a meal once heated. A small notepad on the dash bore a half-finished note. Weather's rolling in, might pull. The pen lay across it, as though the writer had lifted their hand and forgotten to put it back down. The fog moved gently around him, threads of it sliding through open truck frames, curling around tires, slipping between mirrors. It had weight to it here, a kind of presence without personality. Not hostile, not welcoming. Simply there. He turned a slow circle, taking in the silent fleet. Dozens of trucks from different eras, different companies, different routes, all gathered in this high, unseen plateau above the grade. All apparently whole. All apparently left in a moment that had interrupted something mundane. A drink of coffee, a logbook entry, the act of taking off or putting on a jacket. On the edge of hearing, his CB muttered softly from the cab, a single, unintelligible syllable seeping out before falling back into hush. A thought came to him then, uninvited and inexplicable. But with the solidness of something already known, these were the trucks that had left the grade. The ones that had taken the ramp when fate tilted wrong or sensibly cautious, when brakes heated 1 degree too far, when a patch of ice or a stalled car made the straight path untenable. The ones that might have, in another version of the story, been part of wreckage described in tense news anchors' voices. Instead they were here, stopped, removed from time's forward rush like pins on a map someone never finished drawing. The idea was absurd, and yet, standing in that fog-muted clearing, listening to the deep, wordless quiet, it did not feel frightening. It felt still, as if the world had caught its breath and held it gently around these machines and the small, ordinary lives they carried. A distant sound reached him then, faint but distinct, the low, constant rush of other vehicles on a highway far below. Air horns, muted into suggestion, the whisper of tires on wet pavement, life continuing just out of sight. Kai looked back toward his own truck. It sat where he had left it, silver paint dulled by moisture, marker lights glistening dully. Its presence was reassuringly solid, a thread leading back to everything he understood. He walked back, each step making a faint imprint in the damp ground. When he climbed into the cab and closed the door, the truck seemed suddenly smaller and more intimate than before, like a shelter in a dream. He did not check the clock. Some part of him didn't want to know. The engine turned over on the first try, catching with familiar reluctance in the damp air. The gauges rose. The heater fan resumed its quiet work. The CB murmured in a slightly clearer tone now, though the words were still indistinct, as if coming through a wall. He released the brake and let the rig roll forward slowly, turning in a gentle arc toward where the ramp should descend. For a brief, unsettling moment, the edge of the plateau seemed to offer only fog, thick and unapologetic, as if the path back had closed. Then the white parted. The gravel track reappeared, sloping down into the gray, its timbers standing patiently on either side. The way back had been there all along, or had decided to be there now. Either way, it waited. He eased the truck over the brink. The descent was soft, the gravel muffling the sound of his tires. The fog wrapped closer again, but not as densely as before. He could see the faint suggestion of the next few yards, the gentle drop of an engineered grade instead of the endless climb he had felt going up. Seconds or minutes or something without name, later the low rumble of the highway rose to meet him. The ramp flattened near its junction, the gravel thinning. Kai guided the truck back onto blacktop, the tires humming with a familiar texture. The fog on the main road was still thick, but lesser, its edges looser. In his mirrors, when he risked a quick glance, the escape lane was already half lost, its entrance sign glowing faintly, then dissolving into white as if pulled back into a pocket. On Channel 19, a voice crackled, closer and more solid now. Southbound, that pileups off on the shoulder, toes on scene. You're good if you stay in the right. Fog's lifting some. There was no mention of a truck on the ramp. No shout about someone bailing out early. The world had reassembled itself around him, traffic patterns resuming. Somewhere ahead, hazard lights winked through the mist, then passed, then were gone. A few miles down, the fog thinned further, disintegrating into low, ragged wisps. The valley opened around him, the dark shapes of evergreens and rock faces re-emerging. The grade softened. The road flattened. The night settled back into its usual shape. At the next fuel stop, an hour later, Kai wandered into the small building under fluorescent lights. The cashier, a woman with a reflective vest still hanging from her shoulders, stamped a form and glanced up at the monitor showing the mountain pass. "Fog looked nasty up there," she said. "You make it down okay." He thought of the plateau, of the silent fleet resting in its high pocket of cloud, of clocks all touching the same minute, of coffee cups halfway drunk, of a bowl sitting in a microwave waiting. "Yeah," he said, "took the ramp for a bit, came back on." She nodded, slid his receipt across. "Good they keep those up," she remarked. "State, been talking about closing the old long ramp, says the short gravel beds are enough now. But I swear half the old-timers say there used to be one went way up the mountain. We all seen the plans, but I've never found where it ended." He folded the receipt into his pocket, the paper soft against his fingers. Outside, his truck waited under the lights, ordinary and steady, its sides gleaming faintly with road grime and melted fog. As he pulled back onto the highway, the pass behind him a darker band against the sky, he glanced once more at the mirror. For a heartbeat in the reflection, the metal on his visor swung oddly, as if in a breeze that wasn't there. Then everything settled. The road unrolled. The night mediated itself into distances and markers and the slow, familiar cadence of miles. Far above the grade, hidden where only fog knew the way, a small plateau held its collection of paused stories. Engines cooled. Clocks dozed at the same quiet minute. Trucks sat where momentum and fear and caution had delivered them, waiting without impatience. And somewhere between one breath and the next, on some future night when snow flirted with the pass and fog rose in low, coiling bands, Another driver would see a yellow diamond appear out of the gray, and a steep little lane climbing into cloud, and would make a choice that led, briefly, out of the mapped world. Story number 5. The prairie lay flat in every direction, a vast, almost featureless sea of winter-stubbled fields and low, black silhouettes of shelter belts. At night, it became an expanse of layered darkness, so broad and empty that it made the sky feel closer, like a heavy, invisible bowl pressed down over the land. The highway cut through it in a perfectly straight line, an unbroken stripe of asphalt and faded paint that stretched from one edge of the horizon to the other. Daniel's truck rode that line with a slow, patient certainty. The cab was a small, moving island of light and hum, held aloft by the constant vibration under the floor. The dashboard glowed in shades of subdued green and amber. His Bluetooth earpiece lay forgotten in its holder. The only company inside was the low rush of the heater, the faint clink of a spoon in an empty thermos cup, and the soft tick of the hazard light switch he had tapped absent-mindedly and then turned off again. Fog had been forecast for the river bottoms, but what had formed was stranger than the simple icons on the weather app had suggested. It lay on the land in long, shallow bands. Not a blanket, but a series of slow, pale waves. One moment the fields on either side of the road were clear, the dark shapes of fence posts marching away into the night, and the next the world folded itself in white from the knees down, the bases of everything erased. From the cab, it looked like he was driving across a shore where the tide was just beginning to come in. He'd been on this stretch of Highway 6 for over an hour, heading north toward a distribution hub in a town that, to most maps, was just a dot. The GPS showed the road as a ruler straight line, no major junctions, no upcoming turns, just a little truck icon gliding upward across a pale screen. The onboard clock read 1:36 a.m. outside. The thermometer ticked just below freezing. Daniel rolled his shoulders, feeling the familiar stiffness between his shoulder blades. The solitude out here wasn't unwelcome. He'd chosen long haul in part for nights like this, where the world shrank to the width of the highway, and the cab became its own quiet universe. But the way the fog moved unsettled him in a subtle way, as though something in it were testing the edges of his headlights. Every time he passed through one of the low, white bands, the beam of his lights cut into it and glowed from within, turning the air in front of him into a bright, narrow tunnel. The sound of the tires seemed to change too, going from a dry hiss on clear stretches to a softer, more padded whisper in the damp pockets. His mirrors showed red streaks where his own tail lights smeared against the fog as it rose and fell behind him. The CB sat on the dash in its bracket, volume turned down to a level that was more sensation than sound. Channel 19 hummed with occasional scraps of talk, someone 100 miles away complaining about a way station, another driver joking about a late-night diner pie, but nothing close enough or clear enough to demand attention. He checked the next green sign as it emerged from the darkness and flashed by. Exit 214, RIVERB D27. A white mile marker followed a few seconds later, 206. The fog grew thicker ahead, gathering itself into a single, long band that stretched as far as his lights could reach. This time, when the truck nosed into it, the mist swallowed the world up to the hood. The shoulder reflectors vanished. The field beyond the ditch disappeared. The road narrowed until it felt not just like a path, but like the only path, hanging in blank space. Daniel eased his speed down a notch. 60 became 55. The muscles in his forearms loosened, then tightened again as the sense of distance shifted. The world outside the glass felt strangely intimate, as if something had moved closer to listen. The CB crackled. He almost missed it, just a small stutter in the background noise, a pop of static that sounded like 1,000 others. Then, through the thin hiss, a voice pushed its way in, oddly clear despite the interference. "Northline, you copy?" Daniel's gaze flicked to the radio. Northline was his handle, a name he'd chosen half on a whim and half because it matched the company logo on his door. Only a handful of drivers he ran with regularly knew it. Dispatch used his truck number. He reached for the mic but hesitated. He hadn't keyed up tonight. He hadn't called anyone by that name. Northline this is. The voice trailed off, fuzzed, then came back stronger. You're on 6, northbound through the flats. You pick this up, you need to listen close. Mile 210 to 215, stay off the main. The tone of the speaker was strange, familiar somehow. The cadence of the words matched the way he might think them, the little clipped syllables, the rhythm. The voice could have been his own, played back from a recording warped slightly by time. He swallowed, thumb hovering over the talk button. "Who's that calling Northline?" he asked at last, forcing his voice to sound more amused than uneasy. "You got the right ears." A taut pause. Static moved like wind over dry grass. "Yeah," the voice said low. "I got M, you don't know me yet." In the glow of the dash, Daniel watched the numbers on the clock tick to 1:37. The GPS showed his icon gliding past mile marker 207. Outside, the fog clung to the road, glowing softly in his beams. "I'm serious about the stretch ahead," the voice continued. "There's a detour sign at 210, old frontage road swinging off to the right. Doesn't look like much, but you take it, trust me." Daniel frowned. He knew this highway. There were gravel farm accesses, the odd dirt lane, but as far as he remembered, there was no proper frontage road. The DOT app on his phone hadn't shown any closures, no warnings about construction or accidents. "What's wrong with the main?" he asked, more to keep the conversation moving than out of a desire to argue. A sound came over the line, then that wasn't quite a sigh and wasn't quite wind. It carried an edge of something like weariness, or having explained the same thing too many times. "Doesn't matter what I say," the voice answered. "You don't remember until you do." The forest of his own doubt creaked a little. He'd listened to drivers tell stories like this in diner booths, about voices on the line that knew too much, about warnings given and ignored. He'd always filed them under fatigue and imagination, long nights and too much caffeine. His hand tightened around the mic. "You sound like me," he said quietly, before he could decide not to. The chuckle that came back was dry, with no real humor in it. "We've both had a lot of late nights," the voice said. "Look, you're gonna hit 208 in about a minute. When you do, watch the right side. You'll see the marker even in that soup. Then there's a sag in the road before that little hollow by the line of cottonwoods. After that, it comes at you fast." As if in response, a white marker post appeared at the edge of the fog, then slid past. 208. The small, ordinary confirmation nudged at him more than any of the stranger details. Anyone with access to a map could guess his highway. But mile numbers, his speed, the exact feel of the shallow dip coming up, that was harder to explain. Ahead, the fog deepened. The truck rolled down a barely perceptible slope, then began a gentle climb. To his right, through the luminous gray, he saw the darker smudges of a windbreak. Cottonwoods, just as the voice had said, their bare branches reaching into the mist like black veins. "Maybe I missed you last time," the radio voice murmured, more to itself than to him. "Maybe that's why I'm still trying. Maybe this is just how it works." A green sign floated toward him, its reflective surface glowing even before his lights hit it. He leaned forward slightly, squinting through the fog. "Roadwork 5 miles, use caution." The letters were new, bright, no graffiti scrawled across them. He hadn't seen this sign on his last run through the region a month ago. That didn't mean much. Road crews could put things up quickly. Still, something about its presence in this empty stretch at this hour made him feel as if he'd stepped onto a new version of a familiar road. "Dispatch didn't say anything about a closure," he muttered, half to himself, half to the cab. "Dispatch didn't see it," the other voice replied. "You don't see it either, not yet." He checked the time. 1:38. The truck was eating miles at just under a mile a minute. He was coming up on 210. The fog on the right side of the highway thickened, piling itself higher, until it rose almost to the height of his cab window, a pale, undulating wall. The left lane remained slightly clearer, the dashed line between them a ghost. The mile marker appeared, almost too late to read, 210. He lifted his foot off the throttle. The truck began to slow, the trailer's weight nudging gently from behind. His eyes scanned the right shoulder, searching for the promised turn. At first, there was nothing but fog and the faint, repeating glint of reflectors on guard posts. Then, abruptly, a wider break in the darkness, a narrow lane angling off to the right, its entrance lip rough, gravel scattered where it met the asphalt. The road beyond it was almost completely swallowed by fog, but he could see enough. A pair of old, leaning poles, a strip of faded center line, the flat suggestion of an unnumbered frontage road. No sign marked it, no arrow, no orange barrels. It looked like any of a dozen forgotten farm lanes that branched off this highway, leading to sheds and hay bales and nobody's mailbox in particular. Now, the voice on the radio said a little tighter, "You don't take that, you don't get another chance." Daniel's hand hovered between the wheel and the turn signal. He could stay on the main and trust the official maps, the absence of warnings. He could treat this as a story to tell later. About the night he almost listened to a ghost on the CB. But the way the fog pressed against the road ahead, dense and impenetrable, and the way that narrow offshoot to the right seemed to hang open like a held breath, it nudged him in a different direction. He flicked the signal. The soft ticking filled the cab. He took the turn, guiding the rig gently over the rough seam onto the frontage road. Gravel crunched under the right side tires, then settled as both sets found the new path. The fog swallowed him completely now. The main highway, just a lane and a ditch away, vanished. His headlights showed only a narrow corridor of pale, rough pavement and the ragged edges of grass. For a moment, doubt surged up, hot and sharp. Had he just committed 30 tons of freight to a dead-end track with nowhere wide enough to turn around? Had he misread whatever strange pattern the night was offering? Then to his left, through the white, he saw something move. It was a smear of light at first, just a faint increase in brightness inside the fog. As he continued along the frontage road, the smear elongated, defined itself into a pair of bands, the glow of headlights and higher, the red scatter of tail lamps. They seemed to hang parallel to him, separated by the thickness of fog and the invisible ditch. As he watched, a shape resolved between those points of light. A truck, a rig about the size of his own, its outline pale and insubstantial, riding the main highway's line. For a second, the angle was just right, and he could see its door in profile. The logo painted there matched his. He blinked, heart thudding. The apparition moved forward, keeping pace for a few seconds, then slid ahead as if traveling faster. The fog swallowed its rear lights, then spat them out again farther on. Ahead of that ghostly double, something flared. An orange pulse, low and bright, strobing in the mist. Then other colors, blue, red, white, all smeared and multiplied by the droplets in the air. Emergency lights. They grew larger and more chaotic as he moved along the frontage road, his own speed steady but his perception stretched by the unreality of the scene. The ghost truck's tail lights merged with the confusion of flashing colors. Then, without bang or screech, because sound did not carry well through this wet cotton of air, the lights went wrong. The red and white whirl of hazard and brake and reflection folded in on itself, smearing down toward the ground, as if the world's lines had suddenly shifted. Daniel gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, though his own rig rolled untroubled on the side road. He could not see the detail of what had occurred on the main, only hints. The sudden angle of beams, the odd, lurching tilt of one light bar, the brief, steep angle of something large. A long, low thud reached him a heartbeat later, carried oddly through the fog, flattened and delayed. Not loud, but heavy, a sound that seemed to go down rather than out. The CB crackled in his cab, startling him. Reroute traffic off 6 at mile 208 through 215. A new, unfamiliar voice was saying, clipped and professional. Complete closure in both directions. Repeat, both directions due to roadway failure. Sinkhole has opened under northbound lanes. All units respond per protocol. Daniel's mind supplied the image the fog would not. Blacktop slimming at first into a shallow depression, then sagging, then giving way as water and soil did what they had always been inclined to do under pressure. The ghostly rig he had watched moving ahead of him had had no reason to expect that the ground would simply not be where it had been 100 crossings before. His own truck continued along the frontage road, its path smooth, unremarkable. After a quarter mile, the lane merged gently back toward the main, rising a little, then dipping. A faded sign, half swallowed by grass, stood at the junction. Old HWI 6 spur local traffic only. He had never noticed it on his previous runs. The junction with the highway loomed up through the thinning fog. Angled lines, a stop sign glistening with moisture, the darker band of the main lanes beyond, blocked now by the faint silhouettes of vehicles and the sharp strobes of emergency flares. He stopped at the intersection. The sinkhole itself was invisible from here, hidden by distance and angle and mist, but he could see enough. The shapes of patrol cars angled sideways, the steel bulk of another rig half-turned with one side of its trailer dipped unnaturally low, the ghostly outlines of officers and drivers moving in soft urgency. He sat there for a moment, the engine idling, his own breath loud in his ears. The CB crackled again, softer now on the edge of hearing. "Told you," the voice that sounded like his own said. "This time you heard me." He swallowed, throat tight. "Who are you?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Silence answered him, but it wasn't empty. It had a quality, a thickness, like the fog outside, a sense that something was there just at the edge of acknowledgement. Then faintly, "You'll know when it's your turn to talk first." The line went back to a low, ordinary hiss. A trooper's flashlight beam sliced through the mist, motioning him forward. Daniel pulled onto the shoulder, following the slow, careful wave of traffic down a makeshift detour that crossed a field entrance and a narrow gravel cut. The fog thinned and thickened in patches as they wound around the scene. By the time he reached the next town and its all-night fuel stop, the fog had lifted enough to reveal the silhouette of grain elevators against the sky. Lights from a few windows glowed warm and domestic in distant farmhouses. The world had its usual angles again. Inside the little truck stop, under bright fluorescent panels and the smell of fryer oil, a muted television above the coffee pots showed a local news alert. Words scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Section of Highway 6 collapses. No FATALITIES reported. Drivers credit quick response. A grainy aerial shot, taken through retreating fog, showed a dark oval in the highway where the northbound lanes had fallen in on themselves. A semi sat at the edge of it, its nose tilted toward the hole, trailer at an awkward diagonal. Emergency lights ringed the scene in electric color. Daniel filled his travel mug with fresh coffee, the warmth of it grounding his fingers. Other drivers talked quietly in small clusters, their voices low, their words full of the mundane details of rerouting and schedules. He kept his own story to himself. Back in the cab, before he pulled away, he reached for the CB mic. The night beyond his windshield was clearer now, but patches of pale mist still clung to low places. The prairie watched with its broad, indifferent face. "Northbound on 6, he said, speaking softly into the mic, though he wasn't on the causeway any longer. "This is Northland. If you're out there, thanks." Static answered him, gentle and even. Far ahead on some future night, perhaps the fog would be thicker. Perhaps the sinkhole would be something else. A jackknifed rig, a sheet of unexpected ice, a herd of deer bunched impossibly close to the shoulder. Perhaps another version of him, or someone enough like him, would be listening, fingers hovering over the wheel, wondering if a familiar voice could be trusted. And somewhere along mile 210, where the old spur lane waited in the grass like a memory half erased, a narrow road would yawn open off to the right, its presence unnoticed until it was. The white bands of fog would slide across the fields. The night would lean in to listen. The CB, loyal and small and steadfast, would crackle, and a voice would speak sounding to whoever heard it a little too much like their own. Story number 6. The fog had rolled in low and slow, like someone pouring milk into the black bowl of the night. It started as a faint paleness over the fields, a suggestion of softness at the bottom edge of the world. By the time Marcus hit the state line, it had thickened into a true ground-hugging shroud, curling up from the ditches and slipping across the asphalt in long, languid folds. He watched it gather in the reach of his headlights, turning the beam into a narrow, luminous tunnel. Beyond that tunnel, the world disappeared. The distant outlines of farmhouses, the red blink of a far-off radio tower, the faint suggestion of hills, all of it was gone now, dissolved into a soft, uniform gray. The only things that existed were the lane lines, the guardrail when it drifted close enough to catch the light, and the quiet, patient glow of the dashboard. Inside the cab, it was warm. The heater pushed out steady waves of air carrying the smell of fabric, dust, and the faint, bitter ghost of coffee. His travel mug sat in the holder, empty but still carrying a trace of that smell, as if reminding him he should refill it soon. The engine's low hum slipped through the floor and up into his bones in a familiar, almost comforting vibration. The instrument panel glowed a conservative green, the speedometer holding steady at 55, slower than normal, but the fog demanded it. Marcus rolled his shoulders, feeling the knot between them pulse in time with the road's low, rhythmic seams. He'd run this route a dozen times, maybe more, eastbound on 77 through the darkened farms, then up the spur toward the river crossing and the distribution center beyond. A straightforward line on the map. No surprises. The first sign appeared out of the fog like a floating sheet of damp paper. Way Station 2, MILES. Its white letters gleamed briefly in his headlights, then vanished back into the gray. He frowned, more in puzzlement than irritation. He knew where the regular way stations were on his routes. There shouldn't have been one here, not on this stretch, not between exit 132 and the river. Maybe it was new. States put up things without asking his opinion all the time. He checked his load weight in his mental tally, a little heavy but well within the legal limit, even. So you didn't blow by an open scale if the sign said to come in. All it took was one bored trooper and a bad angle on your axle weights to make a long night longer. Another sign loomed up, the fog beating on its reflective surface. Way Station 1 mile open. He lifted his foot slightly off the accelerator. The truck began to lose a little speed, the trailer's weight pressing gently forward, then settling. The fog around him seemed to notice the change, billowing a little more earnestly against the glass, as if leaning in. The CB sat mostly quiet, turned down low. Somewhere in the hiss and crackle, a pair of voices murmured to each other about a storm 2 states over. The sound felt distant, like talk through a wall. Up ahead, the faint pale wedge of an exit lane emerged from the whiteness. A green sign at its shoulder proclaimed scale, truck's exit. The arrow pointed right, its face slick and gleaming with moisture. Marcus flicked on his right blinker. The tick-tick-tick of the signal filled the cab with its small, measured urgency. He guided the rig onto the ramp, feeling the rumble strip thrum under his tires for a few seconds before the road surface smoothed again. The fog thickened as he left the main line. The world outside his windshield shrank even further, until all that existed was the patch of wet pavement directly in front of him, and the glow of a few dim lamps straining through the gray ahead. Their halos were small and soft, as though the fog were allowing just enough light to prove the bulbs were there. The way station appeared in fragments. First, the greenish cast of fluorescent tubes buzzing under the eaves of a low building. Then the horizontal line of the scale platform itself, a slightly raised band of concrete and steel across the approach lane. Then the angular outline of a small office with a window facing the scale. Marcus had expected the crisp, institutional look of the modern way stations he knew. Clean white siding, bright LED signs, digital readouts. This place looked older. The building's bricks were the sandy tan of another decade, the mortar darkened by years of weather. The light above the window flickered intermittently, humming to itself. A round metal emblem bearing the state's seal was bolted to the wall near the door, its paint faded and chipped. He pulled slowly onto the scale, watching for any direction from within. A sign above instructed, "Stop here, wait for green." He rolled forward until his front bumper kissed the painted line, then set his foot on the brake and held it. The beams of his headlights glanced off the office window, revealing a dim interior, file cabinets, a bulletin board, the edge of a desk. A figure moved behind the glass, a brief, dark silhouette against the yellowed fluorescence inside. A small, square light mounted near the window clicked from red to green, with a soft, decisive blink. Marcus set his parking brake with a hiss and picked up his clipboard, just in case they wanted to see paperwork. He cracked the driver's door, and a cool, damp gust of fog slid in, brushing his face with clammy fingers. The night outside smelled of wet asphalt, cold metal, and the faint sweetness of something like old paper. He hopped down from the cab. The ground under his boots felt slightly spongy, the way concrete sometimes did after a long, wet night. Tiny droplets of fog ticked against his jacket. The sound from the highway was muted, just a distant, continuous sigh, as if the mainland were much farther away than it had any right to be. The scale building's door opened before he reached it. A man stepped out onto the small concrete stoop, holding the door for him with one hand. He wore a state inspector's uniform, but the cut of it was dated. Heavy wool trousers, a dark tie, a stiff cap with a shiny brim. A metal badge gleamed dully on his chest in the greenish light. "Evenin'," the man said, his voice low and even. "How you doing out in that soup?" Marcus found himself answering automatically. "Taking it slow," he said. "Didn't know there was a scale here." The inspector's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. His eyes were pale, not unfriendly, just steady. "Most don't," he said. "Not anymore. Come on in, let's see what she says." The air inside the office was warmer, carrying the layered scents of coffee brewed hours ago, copier toner, and that particular dusty paper smell of rooms that held more files than visitors. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly, painting everything in a wash of careful tiredness. A large, round analog scale dial was mounted on the wall behind the desk, its face white and marked with concentric rings of numbers. Instead of a digital screen, a fat black needle pointed to the current weight, trembling slightly with minor shifts. Marcus hadn't seen a state scale like that in years. Most had long ago gone over to digital readouts and printouts spat from small thermal printers. He glanced at the walls. A calendar hung near the bulletin board, its paper edges slightly curled. The photograph on it showed a glossy color picture of a semi cresting a hill under a sunset. The month was January. The year, printed in bold at the top, read 1993. His gaze snagged on that for a moment. Surely it was just an old calendar someone had never replaced. Habit, or a stubborn fondness for that particular truck photo. "Got your papers?" the inspector asked gently. Marcus handed over his bill of lading. The man looked it over with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving with the confidence of long repetition. He didn't seem to need to search for anything. His eyes went straight to the weight figures, the origin, the destination. "Refrigerated?" he asked, though the soft hum of the unit outside already answered. "Yeah, produce out of Raleigh." The inspector nodded, turned his attention to the big dial. She's got you a bit heavier than this says, he observed. You got 42 on the manifest. Scales readin' closer to 45. Marcus frowned. 45. He thought of the shipper's yard, the time they'd spent checking the pallets, the careful math. Axle's good. The inspector stepped over to a row of smaller dials and sliders, old-fashioned mechanical indicators for each axle group. His fingers adjusted a couple, the motion sure and smooth, like tuning a radio. Tandems are fine, he said. Steer's looking good. It's your center that's carrying more than it ought to. My center, Marcus said automatically, then realized the man didn't mean a particular axle. The way he stood when he said it, the way his gaze seemed to fall somewhere just beyond Marcus's shoulder, suggested something else. The inspector must have seen something in his face. He gave that almost smile again, a little kinder this time. Don't worry, he said. You're not over in any way that'll get you in trouble. Some nights this old scale just picks up more than steel and freight. Fog settles in, road gets quiet, next thing you know, she's weighing things they don't write down on no manifest. There was humor in his voice, but something else too. Not quite seriousness, but not quite joking either. As if he'd said the line many times over the years and never been entirely sure where it fell. Marcus cleared his throat. So I'm good to roll. Good to roll, the inspector confirmed. He turned to a small machine on the counter, a clunky device with a lever and a roll of narrow paper threaded through it. He pressed a button. The machine whirred, then thunked, then spat out a short strip of printed material. He tore it off and handed it over. The paper felt thicker than the receipts Marcus was used to, more fibrous, with tiny perforations along one edge where it had once been part of a continuous roll. On it in neat blocky letters were printed his truck number, a line of numbers for gross weight and some smaller text at the top, North Bend scale eastbound. A timestamp followed, indented near the bottom, 2:08 a.m. 1/1493. The ink was a little faded, the way old receipts sometimes looked when they'd been in a wallet for years, but he had just watched it come out of the machine. He stared at the date for a second longer than he meant to. When he looked up, the inspector was watching him, expression unreadable but not unkind. Fog'll be thicker by the river, the older man said softly. You mind your brakes on that downslope, take the left side if you can. Right lane holds the cold a little more. Gets slick. Marcus tucked the paper onto his clipboard, his fingers feeling the edge as if to confirm it was really there. Appreciate the heads up, he said, voice coming out a little rough. The inspector nodded. You run through here again, he asked. Same time, same kind of night. Maybe, Marcus said honestly, routes change. The man seemed to consider that, then gave a small, definitive nod, as if in answer to something Marcus hadn't said aloud. Drive safe, North Bend, he said. Marcus almost corrected him. His handle was North Bend, until he realized the man wasn't using a handle at all. He was reading the name arched faintly across the top of the old scale dial, North Bend. Outside, the fog felt thicker after the relative clarity of the office. The lamps in the lot buzzed faintly, their light cutting only a few feet before dissolving. He climbed back into his cab, shut the door, and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, listening to the steady, real-world sounds of the engine and the blowers and the faint tick of cooling metal. The dash clock read 2:08 a.m. He pulled off the scale and followed the exit lane back toward the main highway. The ramp's merge sign emerged from the mist. Trucks merged left. Below it, a smaller, older sign clung to the same post, nearly obscured by grime. North Bend scale next right. Its arrow pointed toward where he had just been. As he eased back onto the interstate, the CB crackled with renewed clarity. Copy that closure at the bridge, a voice was saying. You sure? Negative, just black ice on the right lane, another answered. Couple fender benders on the shoulder. Left lane's movin' if you take it slow. fog sitting thick in the low spot. Marcus merged into the left, blinking as the timing clicked into place. He rolled down the gentle grade toward the river, the fog sinking and pooling more heavily as he went. The headlights picked out the faint glitter of moisture on the asphalt, the slight darkening along the right-hand lane where the cold had settled. He passed a patrol car angled on the shoulder, its blue light a muted humming glow in the mist. A pickup sat ahead of it, slightly askew, front end nose-kissed to the guardrail. Both vehicles were on the right. The left lane remained open, a thin, clear ribbon through the trouble. He took it, touching his brakes lightly, feeling the steady, controlled response. The trailer followed, weight pushing but not arguing. The truck moved through the worst of the fog and then began to climb again, the moisture thinning, the road drying. The river slipped away behind him, unseen but past. By the time he reached the distribution center just past dawn, the way station was something he told himself he would think about later, when he was less tired and more inclined to laugh at his own nerves. The morning light thinned out the memory of the greenish fluorescence and the analog dial, made them feel more like fragments of a dream. In the break room, over a styrofoam cup of burnt coffee, he mentioned it casually to another driver, just to see. "They opened that old scale again?" the other man asked, raising an eyebrow. "North Bend. Thought the state shut that place down after the floods back in the 90s. Took half the hillside under it. There's nothing left there but a slab and some busted-up concrete." Marcus's hand slid toward his clipboard almost of its own accord. He drew out the weight slip the inspector had given him. The paper was still there. The company name, the gross weight, the date. 1993. He turned it over. The back was blank, just coarse, fibrous paper. He pressed it between his fingers. It felt solid, real, as much a thing as the table under his elbows. Later, when he tried to scan it into the company's system with his other paperwork, the scanner's glass hummed and the light bar traveled under it, but the preview on the screen showed only a pale, empty rectangle. The other documents appeared crisp and dark. The weight slip from North Bend did not register at all. He tried photographing it with his phone. On the screen, the image looked almost passable at first glance, but when he zoomed in, the text blurred into unreadable gray, as if the camera had decided the details were unimportant. Eventually, he slid the slip into the back of his logbook, behind newer sheets and mundane fuel receipts. It stayed there, a thin, quiet weight he sometimes remembered when the fog sank low on other nights. Months later, on a clear afternoon, curiosity pulled him off the main line when he passed the faded green sign for North Bend exit. The ramp was shorter than he remembered. The access road narrower. Where the way station should have been, there was, as the other driver had said, only a cracked concrete pad and a couple of leaning light poles without bulbs. A single twisted piece of guardrail lay half buried in weeds. The air was dry. The sky was a hard, bright blue, no fog anywhere. He parked his truck for a few minutes at the edge of the ruined lot, engine idling, and listened. There was nothing but the rustle of wind in the scrub and the distant, ordinary rush of traffic on the interstate. When he flipped back through his logbook that night, the old slip was still there, edges softening, date unchanged. Sometimes, on late runs when the fog hugged the ground, he would catch himself glancing down at the dash clock around 2:08, fingers resting lightly on the wheel as if waiting for something. Out on other roads, other scales stood with their digital readouts and their bright, efficient lights, weighing steel and freight and axles with unblinking precision. But somewhere along that stretch of 77, on certain nights when the fog was thick and the traffic light and the world felt narrowed to a single lane through gray, drivers swore they saw a sign that shouldn't be there, and a low, old-fashioned building glowing faintly in the mist. Most of them kept going. Some pulled in. A few came away with a slip of paper that didn't scan, and a quiet piece of advice about the mile ahead that turned out to be useful in ways no dot bulletin had mentioned. And when they told the story later, over coffee in bright-lit diners or in the soft, humming dark of other cabs, they always ended it the same way, with a shrug, a half-smile, and a glance at the clock, as if listening for an unseen needle somewhere, trembling on a dial that weighed more than just the load they carried. Story number 7. The distribution center sat low against the prairie, a square of sodium yellow light in a world that had folded itself into fog. From the highway exit, its sign was just a pale, hovering rectangle above a line of bare trees, the company logo half erased by the drifting white. Everything beyond the guard shack was suggestion, the faint geometry of buildings, the long, horizontal lines of loading docks, the vague glow of yard lamps reaching a few yards into the mist and then giving up. Lena eased her rig off the ramp and onto the access road. The asphalt here was slick with condensation, the fog hugging it like a second skin. Her headlights turned the air ahead into a short, glowing tunnel, the wet lane lines flashing up at her in quick, regular beats. The rest of the world was muffled. Even the clatter of the refrigerated trailers parked along the perimeter blended into a low, distant hum. It was just past 2 in the morning. Her dash clock read 2:03. She'd been on the road since late afternoon, hauling dry goods from a regional hub 3 states over, the night slimming the world down mile by mile until there was only this little island of light at exit 9, the last drop for the week. The guard shack emerged from the fog at the last possible moment, a small glass box on a concrete pad. Its windows glowed warm, and the boom gate striped arm floated in the white like a piece of half-remembered scenery from somewhere else. She rolled to a stop, cracked her window. Cold, damp air slid in with a ghost of wet asphalt and exhaust. The guard leaned out of his booth, clipboard in hand. The reflective tape on his vest caught her headlights and flared briefly, then dulled as the angle changed. His face was the specific, soft tired of someone whose night had already been long. "Evening," he said. "You're early." "Lena Ortiz, North Star Logistics," she replied, passing up her paperwork. "Got a 2:30 unload for Dock 47. He flipped through the pages with a quick practiced glance, stamped something without looking. The stamp's thunk carried oddly in the wet air. Right, he murmured. "System, showing we're full up on the front yard. Gonna have you stage in overflow for a bit. They'll call you on the yard channel when they're ready for you." She nodded. Overflow wasn't unusual at a place this size. "Where you want me?" she asked. The guard pointed vaguely into the fog, as if the rows of trailers and painted lane markers were as clear to him as if it were noon. "Take it straight down past the main docks," he said. "When you hit the fence at the far end, swing left into overflow B, just park up in row K, anywhere you find a hole. Monitor channel 12. "Row K," she repeated, more to lodge it in her mind than out of doubt. He handed her a battered handheld radio through the window. "In case your set doesn't hit well in the back," he said. "These yards eat signals. Bring it back on your way out." There was a small, worn label on the radio's side. "Exit 9, yard." The plastic was polished by a lot of hands. She set it on the passenger seat, took her paperwork back, and rolled forward as the gate arm lifted. The fog closed behind her like a door. Inside the fence, the distribution center's world unfolded in fragments. The long, low slab of the main warehouse on her right, its dock doors lined up in a row like closed eyes. The harsh white circles of yard lamps on tall poles, their light diffused into soft, glowing domes. The silhouettes of trailers, shrouded in mist, packed 2 and 3 deep in some lanes, standing alone in others like stray teeth. Engines idled here and there in the dark, invisible but present in the subtle vibration underfoot. Refrigerated units droned, their zones of cold pushing faint plumes of vapor into the air. The smell of diesel hung just under the dampness, metallic and thick, softened by the fog. Lena followed the arrows painted on the pavement, their shapes glistening faintly. The main dock doors loomed and passed, numbers stenciled above them. 32, 33, 34. disappearing into the fog almost as soon as she read them. Beyond Dock 60, the building's wall gave way to a stretch of chain-link fence. Floodlights on the far side were reduced to vague, glowing orbs, like moons half swallowed by cloud. The pavement dulled under her tires as she reached the far end of the yard, the drainage here not quite as good. The fog thickened, pooling in low spots, turning the world beyond her side mirrors into blankness. The top edges of the trailers around her vanished, sawn off by a low white ceiling. Somewhere ahead, she saw the dim suggestion of a corner, the fence line bending left. She turned with it, the trailer following in a satisfying, precise swing. A small, reflective sign flashed up on her right, water droplets beating on its surface. Overflow B. Beneath that in smaller letters, ROWSHM. She rolled slower now, eyes scanning for the row markers. The lanes between the parked trailers were narrower here. Trailer faces loomed up at her, white and featureless, their serial numbers stenciled in black. Fog curled lazily around their landing gear and wheels, hiding and revealing bits of rust, coils of electrical cords, stray wooden pallets leaning against bumpers. A sign emerged from the murk at the head of a lane. K, the letter gleamed back at her in her headlights, crooked on its post. She eased the rig into the row. On either side, trailers stood in parallel lines, their sides gleaming dully. Some bore the swooping colors of her own company. Others were gray rental boxes or bore the logos of national chains. A few were plain white, anonymous. Red marker lights glowed faintly along their edges, like the embers of a dying line of coals. Halfway down the lane, she spotted an open patch between two parked units. She swung in, straightened carefully, watching her trailer's reflection slide along the aluminum skin of its neighbor until they sat just right. She set the parking brake, the familiar hiss and clunk oddly muted, as though heard through a wall. For a moment she simply sat, both hands resting on the wheel, listening to the muffled universe around her. The heater whispered. The clock ticked its soft digital increment. Outside, the fog pressed close against the glass, beads of water forming and then slipping down in reluctant rivulets. She reached for the handheld radio and clicked it on. A soft burst of static greeted her, then the faint murmur of yard chatter. 47. You're clear to pull from 61 when you're ready. Copy that. Bring in the mule around the back. Anybody got eyes on a dropped 45 in row D? Saw the paperwork, but the sound had a certain texture, a flatness she associated with older equipment. The voices came through a little thinner than she was used to, as though traveling a longer distance. She clipped the radio to the little net pocket on her door, within reach. Then she closed her eyes for a moment, just resting them. Not sleeping, just letting that particular deep tired ache behind them ease. When she opened them again, the world outside looked the same walls of white, same faint glow of marker lights from the rows around her. Her dash clock read 2:19. Truck in row K, North Star drop for 47, the radio crackled suddenly. You copy, driver. She picked it up. Copy, she said. This is Lena and K, you need me to the dock. Affirmative, the voice replied. It was male, unhurried, carrying the soft flattening of the regional accent. There was something a little old-fashioned in the phrasing. Bring it around to door 47. We'll have a green for you. Use the south lane. She pictured the yard in her mind, the map the guard had sketched in his directions. South lane meant looping back around the fence, then cutting across by the bulk fuel tanks to the main dock face. Straight enough. She started the engine. The vibration slipped back into her bones, reassuring. Outside, the fog seemed to pull slightly away from the headlights, then curl back in when she moved, like breath on a mirror. Backing out between the trailers was a slow, careful dance. Their pale sides loomed on her mirrors, glowing in her work lights. The fog cut depth perception, making everything feel closer and further at the same time. She took it in inches, in small corrections, until the rig sat square in the lane, facing back the way she'd come. The yard beyond row K had changed in some small, almost imperceptible way. She drove slowly, eyes narrowed against the wash of white. The row marker sign at the head of K passed by on her right, the letter a dark smudge. When she reached the main aisle where she expected to turn toward the docks, she found instead another wall of trailers, nose into a warehouse face she didn't recognize. The building here looked older than the one she'd passed earlier, its cinderblock walls stained in vertical streaks, the dock bumpers more chewed up. The door numbers above them were painted by hand, not printed on slick reflective plaques. 12, 13, 14, ghosting up through the fog. She stopped, frowning. The pavement under her tires was rougher here, patches of older asphalt showing through the newer. The layout didn't match the route she'd taken coming in. She should have been able to see the main crossyard, the faint silhouette of the fuel island, the glow of the guard shack in the distance. There was only more fog, more trailers, more low-lit walls. The radio crackled. "Lena in North Star, you movin'. Can't see your headlights from the dock." "Working on it," she answered, keeping her tone light. "Fog's thicker and overflow than it looks from the building." A quiet chuckle came back. "Ain't that the truth?" the dispatcher said. "Happens every time the river fog drifts up. Just keep the dock face on your left, you'll hit the main run." She eased forward. The warehouse wall slid by on her left, door numbers ticking upward. 15, 16, 17. The fog swallowed everything above the first story. Her headlights picked out the cracks in the concrete, the scuffs at loading height, the shine of moisture on the metal dock plates. The lane curved slightly, then straightened. The doors continued, 18, 19, 20. The scale of it began to feel wrong. This building, if continuous, would have stretched farther than she knew the property line to be. She checked the dash clock, 2:25. Up ahead she saw movement, a pale, squat shape cutting across the lane. A yard truck, a terminal tractor, its rounded nose barely visible in the soup. Its hazard strobes flashed amber, making a little halo around it. Relief loosened something in her chest. She could ask for a guide. "Yard truck just crossed my lane," she said into the handheld. "You see him near 47. A pause then. "Negative. Yard mules are all up front. You solo back there, Lena." She watched the ghostly shape trundle across in front of her, disappearing between two rows of trailers to her right. The fog closed behind it, erasing the path. She reached the intersection where it had passed and slowed to a crawl, peering down the lane. Trailer rears lined both sides, their doors a patchwork of colors and logos. At the far end, something glowed faintly, a rectangle of light at about dock height, like an open bay door in an older building. It was in roughly the right direction. She turned right. The rows here were closer together. Her mirrors barely cleared the parked units. Her own trailer's side brushed damp air inches from its neighbors. The fog carried the smell of cold metal and old freight, a hint of cardboard and plastic wrap, and something like coffee ground into concrete. Halfway down, she passed a trailer with a logo she hadn't seen since she was a kid. A delivery company her father had once driven for, long absorbed into a larger chain. The paint was faded, the swooping letters ghost-like under the thin sheen of moisture. Its serial number caught her eye, NSX 147, North Star's old prefix. They hadn't used the X series in years. She drove on. At the end of the lane, instead of an open dock, there was only empty fog, pressing close. The faint glow she'd seen had been a trick of overlapping reflections. Her hands tightened on the wheel. The yard's logic had slipped. The mental map she'd built from the guard's directions and her first pass down the front of the warehouse no longer matched what lay around her. She clicked the radio again. "Exit 9, this is Lena. I think I've overshot something. I'm not seeing the new dock numbers. Feels like I'm back by an older part of the building." Silence answered, layered and full of low, uneven static. "Exit 9, you copy." More static then, faintly, Ina. Her name caught in the noise, half-formed. She tried her truck's own CB, switching to channel 12 as instructed. The scanner hissed, then delivered only the distant blur of another yard's traffic, miles away. Channel 12 here was empty. The handheld radio on her seat crackled again, suddenly clear. "Sometimes it stacks," a different voice said quietly. Not the dispatcher, not anyone she recognized. A woman older with a slow, measured way of speaking. "Fog comes in off the river, yard shapes don't like it. Lots get on top of each other." Lena lifted the radio, the plastic warm where it had been resting. "Who's this?" she asked. "Row K right," the woman said. "North Star 230 unload, you're running the maze." The fog thickened in front of her headlights. Little droplets streaked sideways on the windshield, rearranged by a wind she couldn't feel. "I took a right at K and followed the dock face," Lena said. "Building doesn't look like the new maps. Where the main run from here?" "Depends which night you're on," the woman said. Lena swallowed. There was the faintest clink of a ceramic mug on a hard surface in the background, and the low, continuous rumble of reefer units. It sounded like the break room or an office near the docks. "You want 2023 into the front yard," the voice continued. "You keep the building on your left till you pass Dock 30. If you go past 60, you've gone back too far. If you see the old logo trailers, you've slid sideways. Just don't chase the mules. They're not on your shift." Lena let out a small breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It fogged the inside of the glass for a second before clearing. "Who am I talking to?" she asked. A soft pause. Then, "They call me Roe. Been dispatching this yard longer than most of those dock doors been installed." She glanced at the dash. The digital clock flicked from 2:27 to 2:28. "Okay, Roe," she said quietly. "Building on my left, count docks, ignore the ghosts, got it." "Good girl," the woman replied, and there was something in the words that felt almost like a hand on a shoulder. "We don't lose many for good, but fog nights like this, it likes to keep folks wandering a while. Bring it back to 37 and you'll start to hear the real PA again." The phrase "for good" nudged at Lena's nerves, but the calm in Roe's voice steadied her. She turned the wheel, easing the rig into a slow U between the rows. The trailer seemed to slide through the fog like something underwater, its edges softened. When she straightened out again, the warehouse wall was once more on her left. This time, as she rolled along, she watched the dock numbers with more attention. 18, 19, 20. The concrete here was more cracked, patched in places. An older section, unused tonight. A door had a rusted padlock hanging from its latch. Then gradually the character changed. Fresh paint appeared on bumpers. Newer dock shelters replaced old rubber flaps. The numbers jumped, 26, 27, 28. The building's texture smoothed, newer cinder blocks showing under the lights. Somewhere ahead, muffled by fog, she heard the faint, tinny echo of a PA speaker. "Calling yard Mule 3 for Dock 49, Mule 3 to 49. The radio on her seat crackled once, a small confirmation. "See," Roe's voice said, softer now, "you've slipped back on track." Lena rolled past Dock 30. The yard opened up slightly. The fog thinned just enough that she could make out the suggestion of the main cross lane, a darker band of pavement cutting perpendicular, the faint silhouettes of fuel tanks beyond. At Dock 47, a green light glowed beside the door, clear and bright. The halo around it was smaller here, the fog giving way in a shallow circle as if respecting the reality of tonight's schedule. She backed in on the first try, the trailer squaring neatly in the bay. The dock lock clamped with a solid ka-chunk that vibrated up through the frame. The green light flicked to red. She set the brake, killed the engine, and for a moment just sat listening. The yard sounded normal now. The reefer units hummed in a familiar chorus. The far-off hiss of tires on the access road drifted in. Somewhere, a metal dock plate banged as a forklift crossed over it. Through the glass of the dock door in her side mirror, she could faintly see the yellow flash of a forklift's beacon. The handheld radio was quiet. She unclipped it, thumbed the talk button. "Ro," she said, "you still there?" Only soft static answered. She waited, then climbed down from the cab. The air on the dockside was cool but not as clammy as in the back lot. The fog had retreated a little from the building, leaving a damp sheen on the asphalt. The overhead lights marked out a clearer path. Inside the receiving office, under fluorescent panels and corkboards covered in delivery schedules, a man with a tablet checked her in, scanning barcodes and working through the motions without looking up much. Behind him, a safety poster showed a smiling cartoon forklift reminding everyone to watch their corners. The clock on the wall read 2:38. "Slow night?" she asked, signing where he indicated. He shrugged. "Fog's got the back kind of locked down," he said. "We try to keep folks up front when it rolls in like this. Less chance of M getting turned around." "Yeah," she said. "I noticed. Your dispatcher Ro helped me out on the handheld. I was about to start nomming the trailers." He frowned mildly. "Ro." "Older lady," Lena said. Gravelly voice. "Sounds like somebody's aunt you don't mess with. Said she's been dispatching the yard since before half the doors were installed." The man's expression flickered, something between confusion and a shadow of recognition. He glanced toward the inner office door, where a small photo board hung, framed in cheap black plastic. "That be Rosemary," he said slowly. "Ro." His voice softened a little on the name. "She trained half the guys in that tower before she retired. Lung thing took her couple years back. We still got her coffee mug around here somewhere." He gestured vaguely to a shelf, where a chipped ceramic cup with the company logo sat among pens and stray hardware. Some days the yard, some days the YARDER. Someone had printed on it in fatting marker. Lena felt a small chill skate down the back of her neck, not sharp, but insistent, like cold fingers tracing her spine. "Phones still call the old tower line sometimes," the man went on, more to fill the air than to explain anything in particular. "Foggy nights mostly. We get static, couple of words. Old guys say she never really left the desk, you know." He smiled, but his eyes went past her, out toward the lot. "Yard, weird like that. Steel and concrete remember stuff, especially when the fog moves in off the river. Layout's been changed so many times, sometimes feels like there's 3 versions sitting on top of each other." Lena signed the last of the forms. The motions of checking, stamping, scanning grounded her. As she turned to leave, she glanced at the photo board. In one frame, a woman in a reflective vest stood in front of a row of trailers, a radio in her hand, hair pulled back under a cap. Her eyes were sharp, her smile small but real. Someone had written RO in felt tip under the picture, the ink a little blurred. Back in her cab, the handheld radio sat where she'd left it. When she turned it over, she saw a faint indentation on the plastic casing where a thumb had rested a lot over a lot of nights. The label Exit 9, Yard, was worn almost smooth. By the time her trailer was unloaded and she'd gotten her paperwork back, the fog outside had thinned. It clung only in low swales in the hollow at the base of the fence, in the little dip near Overflow B. The rest of the yard was just damp under sodium light. As she rolled past Row K on her way out, she glanced down the lane. The trailers stood in their neat double line, ordinary and solid. No older logos, no impossible building faces, just metal and paint and the faint scuff of tires. At the guard shack, she handed back the handheld radio. The guard took it with a nod and set it in a cradle on his desk, next to a small, framed photo of a group of yard staff posed by the old tower. Ro's face was there among them, half turned toward the camera, as if someone had called her name. "Fog wasn't too hard on you, was it?" the guard asked. "Got a little turned around in Overflow," she admitted. "Ro talked me through it." The guard's eyebrows lifted a fraction. "Yeah," he said softly, "she's good at that." He didn't ask the obvious question. The gate arm lifted. Lena pulled out onto the access road, the truck's lights pushing ahead into the thinning night. In her mirrors, the distribution center shrank to a square of light in the mist, then to a soft glow, then to nothing at all. On other nights, heading down other exits toward other yards, when fog lay thick over dock lanes and trailer rows like a low, patient tide, she would sometimes hear a voice cut across the yard chatter. A brief, calm direction. A dock number spoken like a reassurance. A quiet, "Don't chase the mules, they're not on your shift." And the drivers who heard it, lost in back lots that didn't quite match their maps, circling lanes that seemed to rearrange themselves between glances, would find, more often than not, that when they looked up, the right door would be there. The building face would be newer again. The PA would sound like it belonged to this year. Most of them never knew the name that went with the voice. They only knew that, in the thickest fog, when the yard seemed bigger than the land it sat on, someone was still watching the pattern of headlights from a tower that might or might not still exist, quietly guiding them back toward the glow of the main building and the lane that led out.